And so with time is of the essence, let's get moving. First thing I did put on the agenda is that we're looking for approval of the previous month's minutes. They're attached in your packet and sent out previously. Do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Our first order of business is to discuss the executive orders that, as part of our charge, where the governor asked us to look at the executive orders that were on the books related to climate change and to see whether any changes were needed or, and to start there. So, as I described in the email that I sent to you, we made a mistake and realized that in the creation of this commission, it actually rescinded Executive Order 1512, or superseded Executive Order 1512, which is the climate covenant. So Executive Order 1512 is not part of our discussion. Additionally, the Energy Generation Siting Committee, which was Executive Order 1012, was rescinded by Executive Order 0115 following the conclusion of that commission's work. So the executive orders we have up for discussion today are the Executive Order 0111, which is the Council on Energy and Environment, the Vermont Housing Council, which is 0811, and the Climate Change Considerations and State Procurement, which is 0516. I did, and during our last discussion, there were some questions about 0516 and its relationship to how it was working and how it was being used. I have had extensive conversations with BGS about the program. Essentially, it provides for, in an instance where there are comparable projects or comparable bids on a project, it would provide weight to an applicant who can prove that they have done actions to reduce their carbon impact, install renewable energy, work on electrical efficiency, etc. They're happy with it. They think it's relatively early in its lifespan to know its full impact, but are very much positive about it continuing to do it, so continue on with its goal. Any questions on that? Okay. And then I had also some feedback from the Agency of Commerce and Community Development on the Housing Council, which as we noted, only tangentially is related to our effort. It really speaks to energy efficiency and other matters related to housing. The Housing Council is currently very active and doing its job well, and I don't think it's really our role to get in to their discussion, but I welcome any questions that they might have. And then finally is the Council on Energy and the Environment. It is not currently active and is up for consideration as to what we as a commission think its future should be. I think in many ways we have taken on that role, and so would say that we are satisfying much of that intent, but welcome discussion on that point.
I guess I have a question here. Has there been any further discussion within the administration about the continuity of this climate action commission beyond the terms that you're looking into?
I believe it says in our executive order, and I don't have it in front of me, is that we are due to meet, I think, biannually after we provide our report. So we can continue to exist. We can recommend that we continue to exist in some form other than what's included in the executive order as we approach that point. Does that make sense? If we want to continue a regular, more regular meeting than twice a year, then we can certainly make that recommendation at the time of our, time we make our final report.
When you're saying the final report, that's the one,
The July report.
so we don't have to make that recommendation now?
We don't have to make a recommendation about ourselves now. I think that might be a little bit short. So the question is really, are we comfortable that we're fulfilling the role of or providing guidance to the governor in a way that, was similar to the Council on Energy and Environment, or in a different way that is better? And whether or not such a body needs to continue to exist, going forward.
It does say the council shall meet with the governor at least 4 times annually. This is sort of brought up, I don't know, what happened with that, but.
Do you have any sense of what its performance has been in the last 20 years? Frequently have we met with it?
Yeah, I don't have a good sense of that, given that many of the people who were on it from the administration's perspective were gone. So I don't have a good sense.
Just, it does seem, so maybe perhaps it's redundant. I don't know how you clean these things up, but if you have this group working to provide proposals and work with the administration, have on the books another one that is not staff. It seems like we should just clean it up and start anew. But, yeah,
Is that a motion, Bob?
if you wanted to be, sure, so moved.
So what exactly are you making a motion
The
to?
motion is to recommend that they eliminate this executive order entirely and let the executive order that formed this group to stand instead, at least for now.
Is there a second on that motion?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Any abstentions?
I guess I'm abstaining because I'm not clear on it.
No.
Are you abstaining as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Peter, to eliminate which order, please?
What's it?
Which order?
0111. You can want to stay as well. Before I get going too much further, I realize I did fail to mention two things. There are two people who are acting as alternates here today. Matt Coda on behalf of Peter Bourne, and Ted Brady will be joining us on behalf of Ted Brady will be joining us on behalf of Mike Sherling here shortly. And then we have two members who will not be present today who have designated proxies for voting purposes. Adam Knudsen has designated Lyndon McGinnis as his proxy, and Stu Hart has designated Paul Costello as his proxy. I do have the unfortunate news as well that Peter Bourne is resigning from the commission due to health and personal reasons, and unfortunately will not be able to continue. The governor will consider who to appoint in his place. But that's unfortunate, but I think it's the right decision for Peter at this time. Do I have motions about the other two executive orders under discussion?
Can you refresh us again? One was the housing council.
So, Executive Order 0811 is the Housing Council. Executive Order 0516 is the state procurements.
Do we need to make a recommendation on these, or that's what?
I think we can make a recommendation and keep them, as is. No change essentially.
And you said yes, that the procurement one is they're using it and it's.
That it- yeah, it's still right.
I would keep them as is, I think they're okay.
And you consider them separately?
I'll second that.
Let's do them separately, just so that we have that for purposes of a vote now. Linda, can you remake that for one of them?
I will move to keep the executive order number 05-16 as is, the climate change considerations in state procurements,
I will second that.
because it's a good one.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions? And then, we have a similar recommendation on the other, on Executive Order 0811.
I move that Executive Order 0811 be continued as is, Vermont Housing Council.
Do you have a second?
Second?
All those in favor? All opposed? Any abstentions? See, you were all worried about getting through this agenda. Incredibly efficient. Well,
Okay, so great to be here with all of you, and I want to welcome all the visitors who are here with us today as we look towards reviewing what we've accomplished, especially with a small group work, and deciding the status and actionability of these different elements in terms of our interim report. It's really important to know that we haven't been in business very long, right? We're a new group, we're kind of feeling our way forward. We're not building the big systems plan to transform the world in a day. We're thinking about what's within our power and what's reasonable, rational, balanced that we can accomplish right now. We have a set of ideas here that we've been working on in different parcels for the last 5 months or so. And we're gonna have an opportunity very briefly to review them together, think about them, think about if we've got it right, if there's provisions that are in or out of these different pieces. And then we'll come back around, and Peter will lead later in the agenda, you see, an actual vote for us to be passing these forward as our priorities for the governor to consider as he thinks about things that he might want to try and do in the very short term. Knowing that some of these things may not be quite ready for that we may need to do more homework, more research, and we may need to do a better job in articulating some of the goals and directions of some of them. But it's the will of this group, and I applaud Peter. We've worked really closely together on some of the structural process here. We both believe very strongly in free, fair democracy as a central element in how we process these things. So we want to take a few minutes, like 10 or less, on each of the proposals to have people from the work group to give us the sense of intent, and then let us have a moment to review those before we go on to the next one, okay? So we can share considerations or things that may be in and out. Peter and I also see that they're all a little bit different in terms of the structure, the style, and so forth. And we would like to take from your decision our intent today, but we'd also like to edit them so that there's a coherent look and feel to this, and that we get it to a certain level of professionalism. And then we'll iterate out to everyone, so you'll get to look at the edition before we would publish it and bring it to the governor's office, okay? That sound like a good way? So what we have is the 7 that are in your packet, and I'd like to go through these and ask for a spokesperson for each of the group to briefly review. Don't tell us all the background in descriptive detail, but tell us especially the actions and why they're important. And then we'll consider together just briefly if there are suggestions or changes that we would want to make towards the final edition of these, knowing that we're voting on the big intent around those later, okay? So who would like to start? We've got Actually, I'd like to go in order.
I just have a question.
Yeah.
That would be helpful to me, which is, there's really good work here, and I'm looking forward to hearing more detail. There's various, the way I interpreted it, we can answer more, there's various levels of questions or answers. So my question to you is more like, can you give us a sense of like, some of these things somebody's gonna need to pick up and run with, and like, what's the sense of, like, once we make these recommendations, is the governor or his staff, like, how much, like, what's the degree of readiness these need to be in? And is the governor, have you given an indication, or can you tell me how you plan to move it forward so that the things that we haven't answered, or the, you know, because a couple of proposals that I've worked on, somebody needs to pick up and run with, and I wanna know who that is. Can you-
I do think that that's a great question, Joe. I think the goal of evaluating these is to look at our charge and see whether they meet our charge and whether or not they're ready for us to hand them off, right? They don't need, in many instances, they need to be actionable, but they don't, we're not necessarily going to take the action on all of them. And so, in my mind, to judge them as ready, excellent, more chicks. We, you know, to judge them as ready, they essentially need to be ready for where we feel comfortable with them. And where we, I think where we have questions about the mechanisms behind certain things, we could take the approach of saying, we think there's something here, but it needs further exploration. And we're not necessarily the body that's going to be best positioned to do it. And so we recommend, you know, you do it or the administration do it, what have you. Does that make sense?
Yes, it's helpful, thank you.
Okay.
I just remind folks, when we get around to voting, that we did agree in the beginning of this to really attempt to reach consensus as much as possible. So we're really trying to work towards getting there. We've done a really good job of bringing up forward a number of issues that really can move us forward. And then ultimately, if we're not able to reach consensus, a 14-vote supermajority of the commission is what's needed to pass a recommendation and move it on to the governor. So I just want to remind everybody where that process is.
Okay, well, we'll come back and we'll need a reminder on that before we make our final vote. But, I'd like to go in order in terms of how these are sitting in your packet. And I'm wondering who would be the person to overview the invest in biomass heating. I'm gonna ask them to set a model of brevity so that everyone else will follow that model.
I will be that model of brevity.
Okay.
This recommendation is very simple. We have a goal within Vermont of reaching 35% of our heating from Vermont wood by 2030. That will help us maintain our renewable, we'll be using renewable energy, driving local jobs, keeping our forests as forests by relieving some of the pressure on the low-grade market. And we can do this in a way that we recommend 3 things in the short term. One, we had a great program up until 2007, I believe, where we were investing in school biomass projects. There are many of them around the state. We see an opportunity to reinvigorate that program. Obviously, there are additional issues related to a moratorium on school aid that's been in place since 2007. But we think this is a place for targeted investment in renewable energy for Vermont. That comes in the form of a immediate short-term goal of both coming up with the plan to develop the pipeline of new projects, but then also to identify if there's existing funding within the capital bill readjustment process or adjustment process to potentially make additional one-time investments with an eye towards that long-term funding stream. The other 2 pieces are closely related. Last year there was an incredibly successful wood stove changeout program that the Clean Energy Development Fund ran. We spent $300,000 in under 5 months on changing out some of the least efficient, most air pollution emitting wood stoves and got modern EPA certified low emitting wood stoves into place. Both that are more efficient and so they use less of Vermont's homegrown fuel, but they also put less air emissions into the air. So that we'd like to see that reinvigorated. both in the short term with what we can, and in the long term, developing a sustainable model for that. Additionally, there exists some current funding for pellet boiler incentives, both at the commercial and residential level. We think there's an opportunity to continue that beyond where we expect the current funds available to the CEDF, the Clean Energy Development Fund, to run out within the next 3 to 6 months. So we think there's an opportunity to take that short-term look and reimagine it, make sure that that fund can keep going, as well as looking at the long-term funding piece for it. That is the essential elements of this recommendation.
So are there either questions or, I think we don't have time for philosophical, rhetorical questions. I'd rather have people make a statement of intent for, if you have a suggestion for an improvement or a way to make this more effective as a recommendation. We're not voting on it now, we're looking to what amendments or changes we might make. Linda?
I like it, I think it's great. The one question I kept circling was the commit available capital funds. I'm not quite sure how that works and if there are any available capital funds. So having some specificity on how that might occur in the short run would be useful. And I understand that we'd be looking at what sustained long-term funding would be, but it was that I kept circling available. So what the hell is available? So that was my question.
I think part of that is due to the timing of where we are in this process. The budget is being written and capital bill adjustment language is being drafted as we speak, and so it's trying to make sure that we're in that door before it's finalized, to say, if there's things available, this is a great investment.
So as a recommendation to the governor, it would give the governor, it would say to the governor, try to find some money, and this would be a great thing to celebrate and invest in this year, and that would be a good spark for the climate economy.
It's also a statement that we don't necessarily know what the dollar figures should be. And so that's part of the developing the needed long-term funding to organize that and understand what that funding looks like in the long term. So it's seed money essentially.
Right, your example on so I was the co-chair of the CDF when we had that just rush on the advanced wood stove change out. It was enormously successful in your example of saying, this is what we did in this period of time. That was the kind of take that we had. It was $300,000 or whatever. That kind of example would be helpful in giving parameters for each of those if we have to have a cycle. Just to give them an idea of, when we're talking about available, is it 50,000 or is it a million?
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll be, we'll get questions on this and we can talk, we can provide recommendations to what the scale of needed resources would be. I mean, if you put $10 towards this program, it's not gonna do anything, but,
You mean that we could do that before we do a recommendation to the governor, to bring an ongoing dialogue between the commissioner and?
I would say, let's make this recommendation, see how the governor responds, and we could be helpful in potentially answering that question, or the folks who've been involved in the state wood energy team can help answer what those needs might be. Does that make sense?
Bob, you had a comment or something?
No, it's just the scale of the dollars, where it's coming from.
Okay. Other questions or suggestions on this one? Yes, Bob.
This, I guess, is a general suggestion for consideration by the group or by the chairs. And that is that we tie all of our recommendations to as many of the existing principles in the CEP or recommendations or policies in the CEP. Even, it's not a fun job for somebody, but to sort of bullet the fact that there are these suggestions, these recommendations, because I'm reading through this and others, and going back to the CEP, I'm realizing that some of this has already been recommended, and since our charge is to implement the CEP, that it seems like would be a good idea to tie as many of these recommendations to specific parts.
Let's see how far we can get in the timeline we've got for this year, but knowing that as we go forward, that's a good principle to have. And we deeply appreciate the leadership of staff from BPS and ANR in our process.
Deeply glad to provide it.
We'll work towards that. Yes,
Question, I'm just wondering, in terms of the capital, is there sales tax exemption that could be out there as a way to help incent?
on the residential ADA, residential?
I mean, on residential or, I mean, just in general, did you guys explore sales tax exemption? It was a recommendation, I think, of the state wood energy team that could help to answer, capitalize, help people make the
careful, it was a study funded how to grow the industry by the Statewood Energy team. It wasn't the Statewood Energy team endorsing that proposal. Just want to clarify.
Just putting it out there as a potential.
Yeah, so the committee didn't really think about that, I don't think very much. Are you suggesting that we add a bullet in that says that,
I mean,
that
if,
says the governor should consider a sales tax exemption for, advanced
Yes.
wood heat systems in homes?
you just wrote the bullet.
Yeah, is that an acceptable
I think that's
addition?
exactly the way this process is supposed to work.
Could you write it on your master copy, and we'll edit in to include that note, okay?
Do you want me to, well, here.
We'll put it right under here. Okay, in general, it looks like most people understand where we're going with this one. It's clear, it's got some backup to it, and any further discussion on this, because I'd like to keep moving. Some of them are pretty complicated.
I think it was well done.
Okay. Thank you. All right, so let's look at the second one, which is on building retrofit. And is there someone willing to speak for that? Please, Rob? Yes.
Can I just add quickly, I know there's a lot of emails, so I'm going to make sure the full commission understands that the financing committee has some ideas they were exploring, and one of the ideas has been wrapped into this proposal.
Which idea was that?
This was the idea of financing a lot of upgrades for weatherization, bonding.
Like really going to go.
Yeah, the bonding proposal that came from the
Okay.
Climate sign.
climate science. Thank you.
And
I'm there.
as a
So many
note,
names. Climate science.
this will happen as well in the transportation
Yep.
proposal, that it actually wraps in 3 subcommittees' work. Because they all revolved around similar topics, we attempted to unite them. We can decide that they don't belong together if we don't think they belong together. That is, the field is open.
Okay.
All right.
So Bob, go ahead, do
So-
an overview. We'll go from
So
there.
the building retrofit proposal is really based on a couple of facts and a couple of assumptions. The first fact being that 24 to 35% of greenhouse gas emissions are coming from buildings in the state of Vermont. And the second fact is that most of those buildings are existing. And so that leads you to realize that if you want to attack that large percentage of greenhouse gas emissions, you somehow have to deal with existing buildings. The assumption that this is based on is that the operational savings from doing a building retrofit does not incentivize or is not really enough to pay for that retrofit. So there isn't enough incentive, given the cost of fuel right now, to do the investment of retrofitting a house, if that's the only reason that you're going to go through a building retrofit. So what this proposal is trying to do is create an inducement to force people to do retrofits and to create subsidies to close that financial gap, and particularly for people that don't have the economic ability to make retrofits, to sort of subsidize that so we can get those two things addressed. So the conclusion really is that if you want to address that 24 to 35% greenhouse gas emissions, you really need to somehow go back and get at existing buildings. The proposal, in short, is to create a grading system for existing buildings. This is a system where all buildings in the state would be ranked graded from A to F, and that at the time of sale of that building, you would need to have a passing grade. So if you're a D or an F, you would need to sort of do something to move that into a C. It is proposed, it is a system that exists in France. That's where sort of the idea came from. It is a system that would sort of occur at the time of transfer, which is a time when people are going through building inspections anyway, and they're doing assessments of property. It is intended to be an evidence-based system that's based pretty much entirely on the BTUs that are used in the building. So there's a lot of noise in this to talk about existing programs and existing permit requirements and how those things get certified or don't get certified, what works, what doesn't. At the end of the day, if you're trying to address what the carbon emissions are in a building, if you go back and say, well, if you are burning X amount of BTUs per square foot in this building, if that's a passing grade, then we're at the measure that we're at. It's a little bit like having a mileage standard for a car. You establish that we want to, as a policy, move the mileage standard from 15 to 25 miles per gallon, then cars produced need to sort of get there. So this is effectively giving that standard to buildings. That's the inducement. It doesn't come with a system of government enforcement. It comes with enforcement by inspectors, design professionals that would occur at closing. So we have a closing process. If you bought or sold a house or commercial property, you go through clear title, you go through boundary assessments, building assessments, septic system assessments. There'd be a certification that says you meet a grade, an energy grade, where this building is at least performing at this standard. You could roll this out with a standard that says you need to have a passing grade now, but in 10 years, we're going to have some grade inflation, and you need to be thinking about getting to a B, because maybe to get to C is okay today, but long term, if you're going to move this dial, that would be important to sort of be thinking forward. So that's the inducement. The subsidy, or the carrot, if you will, is really bringing capital to some of the existing programs we currently have. There are 4 organizations that are currently out there doing building retrofits now. They're funded, I believe, through, and I know at least amount about this, some of the fuel incentive fees. They're doing great work. Their average cost for retrofit is, I think, $8,600 per building. They see a 20% reduction in energy use. They're hitting about 2,000 houses a year. If we're going to hit the goals outlined for really attacking this sector for energy use, you need to hit about 10,000 units per year. So the proposal is to create money through a bond, maybe taking those fees and funding a bond instead of using the fees annually. There's the other proposal that the Capital Committee came up with, another potential source of funding. Using that to scale up those 4 programs that already exist, and to scale up the home heat saver loan programs. There's a loan program in the state that is currently funded. They hit about 150 units per year. That's leveraging other money, but it's really available for those that have the ability to pay loans back, and it's not based on the assessed value, so it's just based on ability to pay. So if you can create the inducement, give people time because they know it's coming to sort of make those improvements, we think it'll generate jobs. So there's job creation, which will generate state tax to help pay for this. We think that it'll help affordability, both in terms of people buying properties that it costs less to operate, protecting people as the cost of fuel rise over time, and there's a sort of support system that comes along with the inducement.
So Bob, this uses the idea of the weatherization bond as in Neil Underville's DAM presentation as its funding mechanism. I have a question to ask about a scenario. Say you're a low-income person, you have a house that's worth $60,000, it's got a bad roof, it's got no insulation, it's got an old stove, and the person wants to sell that house. Would this kind of standard say, no, you couldn't sell your house unless you put $50,000 into this house to make it fit the standards of a middle-class home?
Yeah.
Is that a danger to this?
I think there's 2 things. One is that the cost of retrofit for 20% increase is somewhere in the...
A 20% increase in...
It would be enough. And this has sort of been the details of how do you do the ranking system, what's acceptable and what's not. But the 5 programs that are out there now, the weatherization programs, that's the average cost of a retrofit is $8,600 per building.
And it would be providing the resource for that home.
Exactly.
So that it wouldn't be the homeowner that would have to necessarily carry the burden of that cost.
Yeah. So if you create the requirement for this, and you create the funds to support the people who can't afford to do that through the bond, and using the programs that are already out there, I think you can sort of backstop that.
And who would manage it?
Who would manage the...
Yeah, who would make the decisions on how much gets invested in each property? And you have your building inspector at time of sale, but someone's going to be responsible for the public wheel in terms of dollars invested. How would that happen?
Right now, there are 4 programs that the state of Vermont has that are currently doing this. So those programs already exist. They're just not doing as many homes as they need to hit these goals. So those programs would be the support system. There'd be more funding to scale this up. The way that it gets administered, you'd have to have somebody that creates the program and the details, of course, But the administration is a little bit like the Title V program in Massachusetts. If you sell your house at the time of sale, you need to hire an inspector to come and look at the septic system and make sure it's functioning. And if not, you have to come up with a plan to address that before you can go to close.
Okay.
So it happens at closing.
Yeah, other questions or suggestions? Tom?
Just Paul, to add to that, it's under the Agency of Human Services right now, under the Office of Economic Opportunity. So it's all administered through there currently. The weatherization piece, the weatherization piece through those 5, so they would, and they're trained, they have a weatherization department within the Office of Economic Opportunity, who has a full complement of people that basically hold the 5 agencies to those standards, both in the accomplishing the weatherization goal and keeping to the $600 average cost per home. So it's per unit or per home, depending on what you're working on, a building or a single family.
Okay, so potentially public oversight of funds would happen in that same structure. Linda?
I had a couple of suggestions. One is that it would be good to reference the statute, which gives a target that we're supposed to reach by 2022, which is 80,000 homes. You probably already looked at that, and the CEP also covers that, just to be in line with what we suggested earlier, to be consistent with what our statutes and our CEP say. The second is that NeighborWorks of Western Vermont is also one of the leading groups that's helping to make this happen on the ground. They do about 300+ homes per year, which is right in line with the ones that you're mentioning, and should be mentioned here because they've just received a very great grant to move into the Northeast Kingdom, where we need to be focusing some of these efforts. The third thing is that I thought that in the bonding proposal, it might be good to bring in some of the language that Neil used on LIHEAP and the sort of the relationship to LIHEAP, or not, no?
Well, it's
might
not
make it
fungible dollars between the federal LIHEAP program and.
As I understood it, and I don't have a full grasp of it all, is that it would reduce our need. There's a virtual circle that was proposed in that proposal, so just to throw that out there, that was a piece of it.
That's a hope, it's not a deal. So
Right.
there's some complexity and unknowns.
But it would be worth studying to see if that in fact could come. So somewhere a footnote that
Yes.
references that.
Yeah.
And then the last piece is to reference all of them. As part of our mandate, we were asked to look at the impact on low income, which is why I'm really glad you asked that question. We just need to make sure that our language reflects that in every one of the proposals. How is this going to help low and middle income Vermonters? And I think all of the proposals can, but I just want to make sure that we're underscoring that.
Yeah. I'm gonna ask people to be brief because we have to be quick. Someone else? Yes, Mary?
I got to step back on this one. I really commend the creativity and the vision in this, because I think it's really bold. But I think it would be really useful if we separated out the commercial side of what we're looking at from the residential weatherization piece. They're completely different markets and approaches. And we start confounding the low-income issues and building labeling and requirements. So I think that's really important. And I don't know if that then takes it to the next level, saying we also should separate out essentially the specific piece about the bonding for weatherization, because these 3 things are not necessarily apples and
Yeah, speak to that.
and I have lots of other comments. I know we don't have time, but I think there's a lot of good stuff in here, but there's a lot.
So, one of the.
Yes, it's very, very much.
So I'm not making a suggestion to this, but as we look at these, there may be some that are going to need more work to be ready for implementation. That if something isn't in our first package of 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever number of ideas that we sent to the governor right now, it doesn't mean they're not good ideas that we're not going to work on. And I'm not suggesting this is not one of the ones we prioritize. But some of these, we may want to do a much deeper dig to frame more fully. And so I hear you saying there's 3 different parts for you in this that may be separable, but did you want to respond to that?
No, I mean, yeah, we could sort of go pretty deep in all of this. I do think that it's incredibly more complex when we talk about commercial buildings, but on the other hand, you know, if we don't do something, that's a lot of square footage and a lot of energy use too. And keep in mind that, you know, if you had a rating system that was actually based on performance, BTU per square foot, you also have to then back out renewables or advanced wood heat and you have to back out processing. So from a commercial standpoint, you could be using a tremendous amount of energy in a paper plant that is not really what you're trying to get at.
Yeah, I'm not saying we shouldn't label, I just think the approach is different
No, they're
for
two different
commercial
approaches.
versus residential versus low income.
Yeah.
Point made.
And the issues are different facing all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to plant a slightly different flag. I really like this proposal. I'm a little concerned about the grading and what happens if somebody takes issue with the grade. What kind of process we envision for people to be able to say, I don't think we got this right. Secondly, have we considered maybe doing something like this on a notice basis or a voluntary basis first before it becomes a requirement? Because I like the idea, I don't like its chances if we are going penalty for to get it out. It might be something that would benefit from a 5-year introduction of new times, something like that.
I think, can I,
Yeah.
I think, there have been, over multiple years, lots of discussion around this topic. And I think there is lots of interest in bringing information to the marketplace so people can make informed decisions. I do not believe we are ready to be a mandatory program. I think, given that, I think maybe we should be willing to consider this issue more and talk more about whether or not we want to consider some recommendation around the bonding proposal. Knowing that there are many questions about the bonding proposal that we don't have the ability to answer right now, and that in my mind, it's an opportunity where somebody's brought us a creative idea to get to major action, but there are potential hurdles and potential challenges that we all don't have the capacity maybe to understand. Do we want it? Could this be a piece where we pull it out and say, we think you need to look at this more because we think it has a lot of potential, but we understand there's more work to be done.
I want to second that approach, because just to say I commend the good thinking and the creativity, and I really appreciate the need to put far more into weatherization as fast as possible. Specifically, one thought I wanted to offer related to the bonding piece was, because I'm a huge proponent of weatherization, I really wanted to work as fast as possible. I would wonder about a study, asking the treasurer to study it, because from, I just have concerns related to the cost of it. I mean, 35 million 20-year affordable housing revenue bond is going to be about $18 million in interest. If you calculate rough numbers, that would be about $50 or $60 million in interest on a $100 million weatherization bond. But I'm not an expert, but I think Treasurer Beth Pierce could be, and I wonder if our short-term recommendation to unpack this from the other two again, I think good, interesting ideas, would be to short-term recommend, get the information that we need to understand what are the numbers, do we have the capacity, what's the cost,
And
short-term.
either we recommend that or we do it. You know, we could be doing that. We could be going to see the treasurer. We could be going to dig in and nail these down at a.
I guess I'm just saying, despite how much I have long advocated for
Yeah.
and want to invest in weatherization, I don't have the numbers to make an informed recommendation to put that much capacity behind this. Because I wonder, after the 3 to 5 years where we ramp up, what happens with the workforce that we have? And how much do we
I will
buy
say
up
that
weatherization?
I think there's, so the bonding piece is critically important, but it's also the ramp up and the capacity within the system to handle. So if we're gonna recommend that somebody look at this, and I don't really think we need a formal study, we need to look at what the ramifications are, and then our elected officials can make decisions about what the priorities are. Then maybe it's a recommendation that the governor should work with the treasurer to consider this option going, and see whether or not it makes sense.
The Climate Economy Action Team is working on this. We have a set of actions that we are delivering to the governor and legislature. We copied you all on it. I have copies of this as an independent set of language. We are bringing the CAP agency directors together. We're bringing key legislators and other people to do more fiscal analysis. But it is a work in progress. So, and we're not not doing it for political purpose or to think we have a final answer. We're doing it as a work in progress to evaluate the opportunity. But I guess this is something I guess we'll have to vote on whether, whether this one's ready to go, whether we're gonna continue to work on it. If it doesn't get ready to go, it's not like we're dismissing it from the island. It means that it's still part of the work that we need to be doing. Yes, Linda?
Just really quickly, I liked how Peter proposed it, and we could actually have as a deadline by the time the report in June or whatever is due, that we would have a more solid recommendation based on both the work of the administration, the climate economy group or whatever, but to have the approach of saying, we think this is an interesting one, we need to do our homework by June, we will have a recommendation on whether we think it's a go or no.
Okay, we can,
Yeah, I mean, I think at the same time, I think we don't, that sort of shortchanges the legislative session to say, if there's interest and they want it, and our elected officials want to do it, it sort of says, sorry, we'll get back to you. So I would say, let's say that we are not, I don't feel like we're necessarily in a position to do the evaluation. So the evaluation needs to be done involving the involved people, and therefore it should be done, and when that's done, then our elected officials can make their decision.
And I'll just echo, like, that was sort of the intent of the financing committee, and I think probably to merge in the documents, some of that was maybe missed, because it was more of a, we think this is something to pursue. I also like that it did come from the climate summit that we all attended, and so it's like, here's an idea, let's pursue it, let's see what the ideas are, what the there's merit, but we're not saying don't do it. And I think the legislature can probably help that.
so we could easily spend a day on this. I'm gonna give you the last comment.
Yeah, just,
So I'm gonna say one thing, so.
Okay, the second
And
to
he
the
said
last
it can't
comment.
be.
And then we'll go on, because we have to cover the ground, and knowing that some of these things are the work of a year, and we need to dig in and get them right, so, yes.
yeah, I just think that anything that we push until June, but do think it's something that we wanna pursue for June, I think that should be included, sort of as some sort of note in the document that we send to the legislature and governor, so that they have an understanding of where we think we're going, so that they don't start going down one path and we're still planning on certain.
Yeah, set a marker, even if it's in the introduction, to say we are also working in line with these key themes that we would like to study as well. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just wanted to maybe respectfully disagree with Linda on suggesting to include NeighborWorks, and the reason I say that is because they're actually not doing the work like the action agencies are. They have departments that are out going and physically doing the work. NeighborWorks is subcontracting the work out, and they actually work typically in middle income or higher income homes. They are loaning the money out to the individual who takes out the loan, and then they subcontract the work out for weatherization, where we're working specifically to do the homes of those in low income Vermonters at to the state program, so that it's state federally funded, and it's no cost to the homeowner. The NeighborWorks has a cost, and then they get a 10% fee from the subcontractor, and that's how they raise their money to operate. So
Okay, yeah, we have enough information, I think, to have a picture here. Let's turn a corner, go on to the next one in the pile, which is the carbon pricing study. And this one describes the public process, the understanding that there's lots of discussion of carbon pricing right now. There's an Essex plan that's being presented by groups across the state. There have been 4 other major iterations of carbon pricing models that haven't been fully vetted or evaluated. There is been talk about the Western Western Carbon Market.
Climate Initiative.
Which California and Quebec have adopted. There's RGGI, which is already a carbon market on the electric side. Could that be extended to cover fuels? And there's a lot of questions about which is the best leverage to advance the longer term goal of putting a price on carbon one way or another, driving public policy in this arena, in building investment in answers to climate change, and in economic opportunity for Vermonters, in line with the governor's charge. So this one's basically proposing, and this is, who wants to speak for the group that put this one together?
Well, maybe I'll just say something and turn it over to Harrison who put it together. So this came out, as you see, of the education subcommittee, and as Paul just noted, a lot of swirling out there. We're having multiple conversations, Steve and others, around, looking at this. And I think as the education subcommittee,
question.
Yeah, just, I guess the idea behind it, was that especially with public scoping sessions, we heard, 275 people discuss the carbon tax, far surpassing the next issue at 70 people. And so we think that it is a contentious issue in Vermont and something that needs to be looked at further. It's our duty to represent the ideas, but we don't think that we have the information yet to, either propose carbon pricing or say that it should be off the table. And so the study would be done by the Joint Fiscal Office, and the goals of the study are on the back, which are to grow the Vermont economy, checking to see whether the carbon pricing would A, grow the Vermont economy, B, make Vermont an affordable place to live, work, and do business, C, protect vulnerable Vermonters, and D, substantially reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And so we think that this study gives us a better idea of whether we should pursue any of the plans that you address, or anything else that community action agencies or low-income advocates have think up, or whether our steps should just be to leave this behind. We've seen, like, the proponents of carbon pricing have said that it works in a lot of other areas around the world, and that Vermont could be the next step, whereas other people say it's never been done in Vermont on this level, and so Vermont is too rural or too small an economy for it to be done in. So the idea of this bill is to get a better sense of which side
Thank you.
has what.
Yeah, and then maybe partnerships beyond Vermont doing things alone that could be evaluated as well.
Yeah.
So, suggestions around,
Got a question there. So if we were to promote this to a level of recommendation, would it then leave the discussion for the remainder of our 6 months? I mean, are we effectively saying, this is what we're gonna do, and so we won't discuss it anymore? Would that be the result of us voting it out?
I don't know what the timeline of the study is. I think that it would be awesome if the study could come back in time for there to be some sort of.
But we as a group wouldn't have any other actions to discuss or
well,
suggest.
you're asking a question where you may be having an answer in your question. You know, we wouldn't, I think that we wouldn't necessarily not talk about it anymore. It would be up to the will of this group. But if you had a commission study that was doing economic analysis, that would give us more fertile ground for evidence.
Yeah, I think that we could discuss it, and use whatever comes out of the study either to further carbon pricing, options, or to say, it's okay, scrap that, it's not gonna work.
So, other observations, Joe?
Question, I guess, is this, the way it's written is kind of vague, perhaps needs some more language, but one of the questions I would have would be, in asking someone to study a tax structure, you know, which leaves an economic system in its wake,
Yeah.
is there anything that we're directing that would include not only disincentives, but also incentives to other things that might lead to a lower carbon or no carbon lifestyle? So, you know, we want to make sure that that study includes the entire economic system around a tax structure. It's not just disincentivizing, but also incentivizing other activities. This is, in some ways, this does not go far enough.
Right. The first Energy Independent Vermont proposal on carbon tax about 2 years ago did build resource in that would invest in creative solutions to drive economic activities that would lower carbon usage. So it feels like there's a range of model that might want to be used, and then the carbon market certainly does that. I kind of agree that that a lot of the language here is pretty soft, and if this is one that we choose to stand behind, I think, again, Peter and I should work to tighten up language and then present back to you. I have an addition that I adapted from the CEAT report, which documents, Joe and Linda and probably others here at the table contributed to this addition. And I'm not saying this is the way it should go, but it encapsulates, I think, the language in this, and might be a more useful, more succinct, and more direct list of some of the sorts of criteria for the study. But again, we can think about, we'll come back to this in terms of a vote if this is a direction we want to go, and then everyone would have a chance to review final language on it at any time.
I guess I just would point out that I think that this is an area where that there's a lot of education and understanding needed by not only the general public, but, you know, people in charge with leadership of state policy as well. I think when we use terms like tax and pricing and terminology that people could create concerns around fear of you know, increased costs out of my pocket, that sort of thing, that it dampens the ability to get the information we need to make informed decisions right out of the gate in some ways. And I don't know if there's ways to look at how we structure the language to have it be something that's perhaps more neutral. One thing I came up with was market-based climate mitigation strategy analysis. Something that
Or economy-wide, climate mitigate, I totally agree.
something that doesn't say, you know, tax or price increase or whatever.
One of the reasons to do this, obviously, is that the subject becomes polarized.
Yeah.
And becomes politicized, and then we, as Vermonters, come at it from the sides, and we tend to think of other people as not getting it or not having the right value.
Yeah.
And that has built a paralyzed political discourse. If we have the ability to have a rational analysis, financial analysis, and I'm not saying I'm voting for it, but we could potentially depoliticize and raise the topic to a level where it could be a lot less dispassionate, hopefully, a lot more bipartisan, tripartisan, and potentially give grounds for us to say what actually will benefit the economy, what is it that we should stand for together as patriotic leaders as we look to the future. Yes, sir.
Going off that, I think that's really good points, and that just if we do propose this, I think it's important that we don't assume that what the data will be that comes out of the study,
Right.
that it's shall I say, that it's written in a neutral way that says that whether carbon pricing is or isn't a viable option.
Seems like a wise observation. You have to wait. Someone else down there, did you want to speak, Bill? No? Okay. Joey, and then to Peter.
And that all makes sense to me, and I just would say that in terms of, there is a foundation upon which to build to, and just to build off the point that was raised earlier, our charge is to figure out how do we meet the Conference Management goals, and the Total Energy Study did recommend recommend studying carbon markets,
Yeah.
and actually in the Total Energy Study it looked at pricing carbon. So I also just say that there's sort of a little bit of foundation upon which to build, and that, I think important to analyze and give us the facts so that we can be making informed decisions and, understanding like what the landscape is.
I would recommend the total energy study in this because it was one of the foundations for this comprehensive energy plan, and it already looks at it and did a lot of the homework, and we can build off of that.
Okay, if you want to say a sentence, Linda, on that, that'd be really helpful, depending on where this goes. But we really have to keep moving, so I want to let other people who've been waiting, Peter, and then.
I'll let you go first.
Okay.
Oh, thank you, Peter, appreciate that. This is from an editorial perspective, and has to do, Paul, with your proposed amended language.
That may be part of, or mixed with this.
I just would like to refrain, if we can, from characterizing what the Climate Action Commission believes.
Okay.
I prefer to simply stick to the actual proposals that we deal with, because we have to keep in mind that there are people who do not belong to the commission, who will be looking at the commission's product.
Yeah.
And if we can avoid sort of table setting that we were just talking about that leads to paralyzed discourse better so, and anytime we start characterizing each of the use of the body, we start reminding people to identify with this beliefs or not.
Got it. Thank you. Peter?
I just want to remind everybody that the governor does not believe that Vermont-only carbon tax is the right answer to enable Vermonters to take the actions necessary to mitigate climate change and adapt. I think we all want to continue to be part of this conversation. I agree wholeheartedly with Michelle's approach that this needs to be a look at mechanisms to do it, and they're not simply market-based. There's the regulatory construct, which is just sort of traditional environmental pollution, thou shall not emit. there's a spectrum. If we're not looking at all of those options, and we're not looking at them, most importantly from a regional perspective, then we're not doing our job, in my mind, as part of this.
Okay, well, let's consider
Can I
that.
add one more thing?
Yes.
The only other piece that I would say is that as we've all discussed, this is a highly volatile issue. The only way that we get the data that we need to be able to make informed decisions is if everybody has confidence in the analysis and who's done it.
Yeah.
In my mind, I think the JFO is a good body to contract this study.
JFO?
The Joint Fiscal Office, the finance evaluation arm for the legislature, is the appropriate body to do that, but it should be contracted with a third party. And one of the things that I might recommend that we do as a body, and we can do this in our recommendation or not, is recommend that we provide a subset of us to help the legislature with the scoping of that potential study.
I think it's a great idea.
Okay, so let's understand that when we come back and vote on this, these general intentions will be in the final draft iteration that bridges what came from the committee with some of the language that we're throwing together and these particular provisions on name, on getting rid of believe, on adding the idea of joint fiscal with contract with a third party external, and so forth, okay? And Ted has the last word on this before we turn to the corner. And then we'll see if we, how it rises or falls as a vote. Ted?
In addition to some wordsmithing on however this comes out, I'd really like to see that there isn't a statement in here that assumes that it will stimulate economic growth, and if there is a statement that says, so for example, in the version you passed around, Paul, it asks how it could stimulate economic growth. I just ask that it also have a bullet that questions how it would stagnate other types of economic growth, so that they can do a true cost-benefit analysis, which is stated above.
Impact on Vermont's economy here, something to those.
Positive and negative
Yeah,
impacts on the
positive
economy.
and negative costs and benefits, I agree.
Okay.
That's a simple option.
I see everybody's heads nodding, that pretty fair analysis is what we're talking about, not one that, as Harrison wisely points out, not one that's aimed towards a preconceived conclusion, but that we're honest with the commission in being brokers for the truth. Now let's set it aside and go on to the next one. Establishing a Vermont climate czar. Who would speak to this one? Was there a committee, which committee did this come from?
Came
Education?
out of the Education, Communications, and Outreach
Okay.
Subcommittee. Great team. That is me, Liz Gamache, Harrison Bushnell, Michelle Dunheimer, Tom Donahue, and Marie Elba. Marie, you didn't have your hands on this one.
Or the other one.
Or the other one.
Okay.
So essentially where this came out of, and I would ask Tom or anyone to fill in the blanks, one of the focuses originally of our subcommittee's recommendations was around clean energy workforce development and wanting to support and really focus intention there. And one of our original thoughts was to propose an inventory, a comprehensive analysis of what is happening out there on the landscape already. There's a lot of Department of Labor work and lots of programs in our academic institution and career centers, and then we learned that the Vermont Workforce Development Board is doing some of this, but it's unclear how much. Anyway, the long and short of it, there's a lot of opportunity there. It's clearly somewhere the governor wants to put, focus far more attention. There is significant opportunity in moving people off of fossil fuels in an affordable, smart way. So ultimately where we landed was thinking that there would be value in having a person who was specifically charged within state agency at a high level, like cabinet level or high level cabinet position. I think this was specifically Tom's recommendation, to task one person to actually be the entity that sort of understands that lay of the land and begins to weave those opportunities together. And so I think the goal would be just to have this person coordinate state agency efforts focused around the economic opportunities in climate out there.
Joy, has the subcommittee thought of, is this an independent office within the governor's office, or it's an embedded agency position at ANR, or is it a secretary of climate change, or that's undetermined now? It would be.
It says A&R in there, right?
It says, A&R in collaboration with Agency of Commerce and Community Development in particular. But housed at A&R, since that's the agency who has climate change as their, within their primary mission.
Okay.
But that it would be, in coordination with the Commerce and Community Development in particular.
And would that person have a coordinative function with the Governor's Climate Commission, or there was the Climate Cabinet, which is no longer active? Would there be a corresponding body, or would they have a staff? Has the committee thought
I
about
mean,
it?
as we note here, it's just the starting place to
Yeah.
help coordinate state agency efforts as well as foster private partnerships. So it's the starting place. We don't have all the question answered, but I'm like, if we move this idea forward today and recommend it, I don't know about you, I can't imagine how long it would take to actually get this staff. So I don't know if it would interface with our July deadline,
Okay,
but it may be something that lasts after.
okay. Maurice?
So there are already a lot of climate change programs in the different state agencies that we all agree on. But doesn't this make it sound as though we don't believe they can coordinate amongst themselves? I feel I've met so many talented folks, Peter being one of them, and I've seen them work together really well. So all we need is a mandate that says, you guys get to put this on your agenda. I'm not sure that we need another person. And on another note, somebody pointed out we probably shouldn't use czar if we do go forward, because it's something from a
Russian autocracy.
yeah.
Not the best,
Maybe we could-
best language now. Okay. Well, we can look at that word and,
I don't know if Tom or anyone else on the committee wants to
Yeah.
speak to it, but the goal was just, there's clearly a lot of good work happening already, but it was more like focused on the economic development opportunities specifically.
June seems to have a question. Tom, do you want to flesh this out at all before she
Yeah,
speaks?
only to say that I think that this is one of the things that came out of our listening to her, and we had those little nuggets of ideas that came out in between folks advocating for carbon pricing, which was consistent. And this is one that I had noted, and the idea of being sort of that climate leader. So I don't feel as one Vermonter that the state has necessarily a cabinet level leadership position right now representing this climate action and all that surrounds climate action, which we're certainly digging into here. And that if we're looking for what we also heard in those listening sort of bold steps sort of to make a change and to get serious about this so that we don't fall into the sort of the steps of the previous administrations that had bodies like this that maybe haven't got as much implemented as we hope to, that someone at that level would be that individual. So maybe it is a secretarial position.
Okay.
At that point. But I think that would be a bold step. I think if I were the governor, I would be anxious to appoint a position like that to show that I was also serious about it, and I think that would help to coordinate all the different agencies within the state. We talked about even 145 or some number like that of commissions around the state within individual towns that are sort of being herded through regional planning commissions. I mean, there's a massive volume of this going on, but I don't feel like we have one particular individual leading it at the administration level. Right, exactly. That I think would really make a difference. It would be like a, really great, what I call a human 211 sort of position where we have for services now you have 211 because there's so many that you actually have to have a directory of them all.
Yeah.
We don't have such a directory.
Okay. Great. Well said. June has a comment.
Yeah, the question I have is, and I think, Tom, if your sensibilities are characteristic of what people in general are thinking, that's one thing. It may be that is just your opinion, though. So my question is the issue that there needs to be somebody who leads this because past efforts have been ineffectual, or is the issue that the folks on the outside who brought this to our attention through the listening tour don't have a clear sense of how leadership around this issue is structured? Is this really a management question, meaning, Governor, could you pull together your existing resources in a cognizable way? Or is this really a proposal to say, we need somebody who's got plenipotentiary powers in state government to cut across God knows this to
Yeah,
these
sounds,
ones.
yeah,
More of the
sounds
latter.
on paper more of the latter.
And my observation then would simply be that, a lot of effort is being put into making existing state government resources work more efficiently and coordinate and communicate more effectively together. And I know we don't have a lot of time, so I won't spend a lot of time on this, but I know when I got into office, the first thing I turned to was electrification of the transportation sector, and it took me a good 3-4 months just to figure out that there are other resources embedded in state government that are working on this too. And I literally stumbled on a working group that deals with electric vehicles. Blah, 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 time has passed, and that has changed. And these things are coming more to focus. So my view of this one would be, let's not go for the figurehead and another cabinet position. Let's go for an injunction that says, please continue to give good architectural thought to streamlining and leveraging the resources within state government that in turn partner with outside resources to have a coherent, action-oriented approach to climate change policy.
Or supportive of our work. I appreciate that thought, but the only thing I want to point out is, I used to run a tourism organization. We had a commissioner of tourism, and I used to do community development for the city of Rutland. We had a director of commerce, commissioner of commerce. There is no commissioner of this.
Okay, so we don't need to debate too far, because we're gonna vote on this, but last
I
comment.
just want to add something quickly, that as a word of caution, that we are a body of many bodies out there in the world that have these sorts of cross-cutting issues, where it's really easy to say we should name one person to do this. But if we did that in every single group that has having these discussions, we wouldn't have enough Vermonters. And two, I'm hearing the workload you're putting on this person without any staff, without any resources to do it. They're not gonna control anybody. I appreciate the concept. I agree that the backbone needs to exist, but the backbone has to be multiple vertebrae.
Can you just take it on as another side?
I was gonna say,
It might not already.
there's panic in this man's voice.
Well, anything else that should be said about
I
this
guess
one at
the
this
one
point? Yes.
question I would ask is, this is what we came up with the goal of being just like to have someone be responsible for understanding the current lay of the land. One place, because from what I understand, there's a myriad of stuff happening.
Yeah.
It could be better coordinated. The goal was to have someone whose responsibility it was. If that's my goal, I don't want to speak for the rest of the subcommittee. I don't know if it's a person, but again, that's why I sort of told you where we started, which was, we don't know. We have a lot that we can build from, but what are the niches that we can fill intentionally with people, with programming, with, funding to actually drive the clean energy sector?
Yes. Liz and then Linda.
I'll just, remember that this came from a subcommittee titled Education, Communication, and Outreach. And part of what led us in this direction was part of what we heard in listening tours and elsewhere, and even amongst ourselves, that it gets confusing really quickly to understand how to navigate through this landscape. And so I think, that's the intention, that's at the heart of this, is how can we be more effective in helping citizens to navigate through this landscape? And also there was a core component of this workforce development aspect when it comes to education specifically, that we think there's a tremendous opportunity to educate.
I agree with you. I think there's a core around that workforce development piece that is the heart of the recommendation. I think we should give some more thought to, and we'll bring in other folks who are working on different bodies that are helping to coordinate climate action across the state to have that conversation. I think maybe that's one we get into more detail with in the spring, but the core of the workforce development piece it really hits home, and it speaks to the potential for bonding. It speaks for a lot of things that we all go. So it would be my preference to have us move that recommendation forward rather than the czar overshadowing.
We'll see where the votes go, but know that nothing is lost in this process. Everything we've thought to date is work that is on the table for us to continue regardless of how the votes go in terms of our short-term recommendation priorities. Linda, you wanted to say something before?
Just really quickly, I think that this is linked to what we might issues in a cross-sectional way.
That's a great question, a great point to end, because we're gonna need to fill those niches with our thinking as a body over time, one way or another. I'm gonna turn to Joe. Joe, you're gonna speak for the Fostering the Climate Economy group. It was first called the R&D group, but now they're looking at innovation and economic development stimulus that comes as part of this that would help to answer climate change. Joe, you wanna share their?
Sure, thank you. So this subcommittee started from the premise that climate change is going to spark on a global level a massive amount of innovation, investment, and creativity around solving this problem. And that what is already happening, it's going to continue to happen, that we're going to reinvent essentially the way we move around, the way we move goods and services, the way we produce energy, the way we heat our homes, the way we live in our homes, the way we live in our businesses. And that investment, and that innovation, that creativity offers us an opportunity to do a couple things. One, to make Vermont the most spectacularly attractive place in which to do that, in which to invest and build a business and cite that creativity and cite that innovation here in Vermont. And in doing so, we would live a low carbon and climate friendly lifestyle, but also take advantage of do so in taking advantage of one of the most significant economic development opportunities in a generation. So really what we are recommending is around bringing various multiple capitals to Vermont, whether they be human capital or financial capital or intellectual capital or built capital. So I'll take you right back to section 5 of the action plan just to give you a sense of how we would incentivize and what we would do to make Vermont a more attractive place to live this lifestyle, to build a business here, to solve these problems. One is looking at capital itself, which is to provide a preferred capital gains tax treatment for Vermont climate economy businesses and investors. That money invested in businesses and technologies that actually address this problem of climate change here in Vermont would be treated differently from a tax standpoint. The second would be to encourage job growth by also providing various tax treatments to Vermont climate businesses, meaning if you're in the business of solving a climate change problem, then your business will be taxed at a more favorable rate to make it attractive to come here, to be here, to do this kind of innovation in Vermont. Also around innovation, which would be kind of attracting intellectual capital, building an R&D investment tax credit for businesses that invest in creating and growing innovative climate economy products and services in Vermont, and encouraging them to grow and keep climate-related jobs here in Vermont as well. And then also saw a chance to address this issue, how to get people to come to Vermont, which kind of cross-cuts across a lot of issues here in Vermont. And we thought that perhaps that we would provide, again, in the tax structure, employee incentives to help repay the student loans of young people who come here to work for a climate economy related business, and in doing so reduce the cost of higher education in fields supporting the development of Vermont's climate economy. And then lastly, provide Vermont businesses with a special competitive advantage in bidding for any activity with Vermont's government or local governments. That if you're a Vermont company that provides a good service around climate change or climate solutions, that you would have an automatic certain percentage bid advantage in making that bid through a contract with the bidding company.
Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, so just to summarize, it's about actually creating a kind of economy where we are attracting people who want to solve this problem and also taking advantage of it from an economic development standpoint.
Thank you, Joe. So questions or observations to Joe? Robert?
I think this one gave me the most pause, mostly because I read it a number of times and felt really excited by it on the one hand, and then really worried by it on the other hand. And it was partly because when I read some of the action plan, I feel like I'm getting buried under a bigger hole of fiscal burden here. But at the same time, I feel like it could it's the one that most directly addresses our charge, which is to implement long-term policy goals, and you know, to really promote economic development. So I'm torn, you know, there's a tension there between those two things, and it's really hard. And I realized after about the third or fourth time through that I was excited to see that this was the only proposal that had any real indication that it wanted to measure something as an indicator of success, and yet I think that is what's missing in some of the action plan. Even if it were qualitative, we think the expense of this is high, but the potential benefit of this is high, or the expense of this is moderate, you know, benefit's low. You know, and I realize that as these things go, you can't specify an awful lot because it's out of our hands. But I think that would really help me personally try to get a sense of what all of these really cool ideas really impact.
So knowing that this is 5 months of work to get here, and that measurement is going to be crucial for us to be thinking about in every categorical area over time as we go towards June and then maybe beyond that. The one question about fiscal burden, the committee wrestled with that. And for us, I guess the real thought was to take a significant direction in the economy. We as a state subsidize all kinds of things. We have an enormous state budget, but we don't necessarily signal where we want the economy to go. We don't use as much resource in economic development or the Agency of Commerce, as Ted can tell you, as we do in many other agencies. But if we're really serious about shifting economic activity, this group thought that deliberately setting stimulus and setting markers would be beneficial, and also that job creation, business development, attraction, and growth over time is going to be the signal answer to the tax challenge, in that it fills the hole, that the incentive, so that you're basically building a circular ROI by bringing in support of business growth and development in this arena in a very direct way. Whether that's sufficient to get your goal or not is another question. Everyone will have to vote their conscience. Bob's waiting, and then we'll go to Marie.
No, I just wanted to say, I think this is a great concept for an economic development strategy. It's very similar to what people try to organize around clusters. You have a cluster of expertise and capital, and you sort of build on that. We have a lot of that happening in Vermont Brand. I think that that's also, a 10, 15-year consistent process to build an economy around a strategy like this. So it's pretty tough to sort of say in a short period of time, here are the actual levers that you're going to pull to have this net result. I think in some ways it might be, and I don't know where the state is on its comprehensive economic development strategy, but this is a leg in that, because the state has an asset cluster around green climate economy, green jobs, but what those levers are and how to do that and how to get that into a sort of legislative proposal between now and that's just, it seems to me that is that's a tough thing. This is literally from other places where we've seen trying to move the economy. It's really a long-term, sustainable, 10-year kind of goal. You have to have resources applied to that you're working on again and again and again. And maybe there's a way to do that. Maybe that this proposal sort of says, how do we set up that infrastructure? Say, here's a cluster we're going to work on, and understand that that's a 10-year effort that might pay dividends out in 15, but it has to be bought into and sustained for a long period of time.
Point made. Other points briefly, sir.
It was Marie first.
Oh, Marie, sorry.
Thank you. So there's already a lot, I'm always talking from the existing businesses, okay? And there's already a lot of us that are in business, and I'd like to make the emphasis go on this to support existing businesses in their endeavors instead of constantly bringing in another new business. On our farm, we get a new vendor a week saying they have the best idea. I don't know if we need to be bringing more and more people in all the time, but just encouraging the businesses that are here to make those improvements. I don't know, I'd like to focus on that. Don't need any more fly-by-night people just coming here for the tax incentive.
Okay, great.
I think that's a good point, but I think we could probably do both in the
Right.
middle. I do.
Harrison.
Sorry. I do think that. Losing my train of thought. Sorry. I think that it is important to focus on the economy. I think that when there's money involved, that's the quickest way to change things.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I ask Dad a question? You put you on the spot. You're here on Mike's behalf, what are your thoughts on this relative to overall economic development strategy?
Sure, well, most importantly, as Bob mentioned, green tech, renewable energy is one of the identified sectors, about 8 sectors of the comprehensive economic development strategy that we recognize as an area that we need to do more work in. I would argue that it doesn't take much to give support to an existing sector through legislative action, or it doesn't necessarily take an enormous one. I think of the work we did in the aircraft sector, where all it really took was a reduction in sales tax exemption for parts and service, and suddenly we have, between 5 and 10 businesses growing really quickly. So, though this might not be perfect, I think we should have a recommendation now that addresses capital, infrastructure, and people in the climate economy sector. And I do think that Marie's right, and I think that this proposal does purposely put growth in existing climate economy businesses in Vermont ahead of development of new climate businesses in Vermont.
Absolutely, talked about that.
So whether these are the right tools, I can't speak to yet, so that probably takes a little more.
Yeah, we have to keep moving, yes ma'am.
I was just thinking about, not so much businesses that are necessarily involved in the, energy efficiency field, but, thinking about like the work I do in transportation, if there's a business that has, a huge transit subsidy for its employees so that they don't drive to work or something, or if we have, if a general store in a village center that otherwise would, if it's, able to supply people with groceries, otherwise they have to drive, 30 miles to the strip mall or something, like, to me, those are huge pieces, and I don't know whether that's captured in this, because to me, it's not part of the, they're not building energy efficiency, they're not building
Yeah,
like it.
it's not every smart growth business. But
Pardon?
it's not every smart growth business would be able to apply.
Right.
But clean energy, clean and efficient transportation would. So there is a significant definition of climate economy.
Right, no, but I'm just saying, I'm arguing that in my opinion, it would be just as important for having a tax break or whatever for a small business that is building our, keeping our villages vibrant so that people don't have to then drive. And so I'm just saying, it's like this, to me, this is a piece of it, but this is a whole other piece.
Yeah, a great thought, and probably a lot more work to be done around that. Joe?
I just want to echo what she's saying. I think what I hope this does is give people or our community here, meaning all of Vermont, the freedom to think creatively like that
Yeah.
within that
Yes.
structure.
Yeah.
That's what-
Okay, so we've got just another minute. Is there anyone else? Got June and then Harrison for a quick final word.
So this is a question for clarification from the committee. I'm looking at action item 4, people specifically under funding could be used to repay current loans to be taken as credit for educational expenses in a climate economy field study at a Vermont educational institution. Was any thought given to maybe changing this to add that we could give credit, meaning invite students to come here to study free of charge in exchange for staying and being employed in the private sector?
We actually talked about that, and it's not captured here well, and I fully support that. I think that's a great.
Because we're trying to get people here, right?
Stay.
Exactly, and we want to have a workforce.
So
in the private
this is
sector.
a suggested amendment to add the idea that an offering would be made for people who come to Vermont to study climate economy.
No,
No?
to study, period,
Study period.
in exchange for staying and working. So my point is, maybe you don't necessarily want to get a degree in climate economy field study because you really want to be a, I don't know, liberal arts major or something like that. The point is you want the person here.
Yeah, I think the group wasn't trying to solve the whole problem of attracting people to Vermont, but was really zeroing in on the enterprise-specific idea for economic development. Yes?
I was just gonna say that maybe it doesn't need to be at a Vermont education institution, because we're trying to bring people here. There's an incentive, a real incentive for people to come here is to deal with student loans if you have the background and expertise
There's that too.
from wherever. Come here.
Well, where would you, so you would cut out,
Come on.
what do people think about that administrations?
I like that.
Can you mark it on your edition?
Well, let.
I'll defer to the co-chair.
Joey, last
I really-
thoughts here.
I really like the focus of this, nice work. My question is, since we're needing to answer that, did you guys examine the cost, like where would the dollars come from, the tax cuts?
That's why I was making
Yeah.
the proposal.
No, we recognize that. I mean, I think the way Ted described it now is that there's, one of the things we didn't do is specify the amount of credits and so forth, or the amount of the capital. And this puts in the governor's lap the idea that you could think about these different stimulus. And let's face it, this isn't, I don't wanna say this is a meat grinder, but what we're doing is we're making a set of suggestions that are gonna go through a real ratcheting process to see what's workable and how, both with the governor and ultimately potentially if he produces things that he wants to pass through the legislative process. So we're at the beginning, we're sort of seeding ideas. We don't have to have everything done, is my perspective. But that said, it's not done, absolutely. So I want to give Harrison a last word, and we need to move, but Mary's waiting too, so she's got the last word. Harrison, please.
I think that upfront cost is something that we definitely should look into, but I think also, like a lot of these proposals, like the school bus proposal, which should cost a lot, have to buy a EV bus upfront, but in the long term, there's savings. I think with this, it's important to realize that over time, I would imagine, and hopefully there'd be more research into this, it could end up paying itself back with economic growth.
Increase tax over, yes.
I just wanna make sure that when we vote on this, we're on the same page with what you just said before Harrison went, which is, are we voting to say that we expect these things to happen, or that we are hoping the governor figures out a way for these things to happen in a way? I mean, we don't know what it'll cost or what the ROI would be, you know, and I love these ideas, but I wanna make sure I know what I'm
Yeah.
voting on when we get to this.
I suspect that every single thing we're talking about could use another year of work to finalize the cost benefit analysis. We don't have that luxury, so we have to come out with the things that we think would bear scrutiny by the governor for actionability. And I do so without a sense that I'm gonna be attacking the governor because he chooses, because the rational analysis of implementation is something that needs to happen. And some of these may not happen immediately, some may be ready in terms of that political action. But we're just doing the best we can, from my point of view.
I guess it speaks to the group, are we comfortable with that sort of approach in the report, saying, we think these are the way, we think these are ways we could move forward, and there's certainly more analysis and look into whether or not this is appropriate, by you and your administration, the legislature, and the treasurer, and everybody else. But, these are ideas that we have, that we think these are actionable now, and we, if you don't, essentially, if you don't accept them verbatim, then we'll understand. I don't know how we approach that, but that's essentially the message we may want
I
to.
think that's the reality of the way the world works. So I'd like to go on.
Well, my only point is that if it were tied more to what's already been done and tied to the goals of the CEP in any way it can be, I just think that it's a stronger argument.
I think it's directly aiming at reducing carbon emissions and increasing electric generation in the whole 9 yards of the sort of transformation we're talking about altogether. But how is that enumerated and how do we enumerate that is a huge challenge. Yes. Okay.
I just want to put a real fine point on it. I think it's a pretty simple solution for what are we actually saying, which is the committee recommends looking at these ideas, and they are not exhaustive, and they may not be the right ideas. I mean, really, you got to put something out there that says, I don't know if anybody here is really a tax expert to be able to say that the capital gains tax
is the one finally.
Right.
Or that it's really even a good idea. It is an idea that might do what we want. Have we done enough analysis to say this actually will work?
I think what we're voting. 100%.
Right.
Okay, Joe.
It's a good half hour.
I think what we're voting on, and our purpose on some level, this is how I feel, is to make a set of recommendations that may be bold or creative because the problem requires boldness and creativity. And we'll work out the details later. To spend time now with the details is to listen past the graveyard in a lot of ways, right? Okay, this might work. Try this. We have to build a new state for a new problem in order to save the planet. Let's work out, let's sort out the numbers a little later. But let's recommend it. This is the direction we have to go. I'm comfortable voting for recommendations, regardless of whether the numbers add up.
All right, so let's close with that and keep moving. We've got 2 more to do and we've got about 5 minutes. So I'm gonna just say, really, we're not gonna finalize the details of everything in the amount of time we have today, but we're gonna get a sense of what's pragmatic here. So let's look at Rural Solutions Subcommittee. Does someone want to speak to this?
This will be easy. This actually isn't necessarily a recommendation to the governor. This was more our group making a statement that the commission should stand behind access to high-speed internet as an issue that's not just an economic development issue, but it's one that's critical to the climate economy and to mitigation and all of the solutions we want to resolve. The rural subcommittee felt like every single one of the issues we looked at that needed to be addressed for rural communities intersected with high-speed internet.
So Mary, is this an idea that, we all support universal broadband and affordable rates to all Vermonters? Is this an idea that we could include in the introduction as something that we think is an important background for the future of rural economic development, rather than a specific recommendation?
Yeah, it doesn't really fit, with all these other pieces, but it fits somewhere. Because we also didn't have a solution.
Is there a place where it can fit into infrastructure? Because this is essentially maybe a transportation issue.
But again,
I don't have to drive 2
Mary's
miles
saying
an hour.
that there isn't an action plan here.
No, it's just that.
Yeah,
Person responsible
Put it in
for.
transportation.
I can speak to
We'll
the
take
issue.
everything.
I want everyone to get recognized by the co-chair.
Yes, Co-Chair. So I have to say, I'm going to take precisely the opposite view and say, I think this is at the heart of the kind of transformational thinking that this commission needs to be doing. Broadband is not just in any one thing. It spans everything, and it is a chronic problem we have in the state. And so it's not just adding a symbolic voice, but rather it's how do we get more detail into this yesterday? And how do we find resources that we're willing to tap? And maybe forego a few other things to put them here, because this isn't going to get solved through fairy dust, right? Departments have been trying to do this for years now. And fundamentally it comes down to money, money, money. Now, we can get stuck doing nothing because we can quantify the dollars and recognize that we're talking millions and millions of dollars, or we can get creative the way Yankee people do and find as many little pieces of money as possible, pull them together to address these things. And if you're going to take that strategy, then it begins by recognizing that everywhere you go and everywhere you public policy, broadband somewhere makes it so well.
Thank you, Jim.
You're welcome. Yeah.
And not only is it an extension, because we have been hearing all, on broadband. Our point is, but this is really a solution to climate change.
Yes.
We want to put the gravitas, this is actually a climate change issue.
And change how people see it. That's
Yep.
right.
Yeah, so I think everyone agrees with that, right? So the question is it a recommendation for action to the governor, or what is it, in terms of how we would integrate it? And Mary's saying that she would accept it as sort of an intention that we say to the governor that broadband is essential to the climate change solution and the foundation for the future of the economy, the way that June's describing, and have that language up front in our introduction as part of the story. And then as a team, we can also think, do we want to get further into the articulation of a plan on this? Or would we want to put it in as a recommendation that just says we need to keep going towards universal broadband?
I personally think that if it's just in the introduction, it won't get we can put it in the introduction, but I think we need to make a specific recommendation to underscore that this is a fundamental problem for climate change, addressing climate change. It addresses land use, it addresses transportation. Make it a recommendation, and it's a relatively simple recommendation, which makes it easier, except for the problem of funding, which all of us are going to have, which is why we need a study on what economy-wide funding is.
Oh, that was sneaky.
But I would say that it really is fundamental, and if you put it as a recommendation, then I think it gets more tension than
So
in a
here's
discussion.
my problem, there isn't a recommendation here, and it feels to me like the recommendation we're discussing is to make universal broadband, to set a goal for universal broadband implementation at a high level of speed and affordable price for all Vermonters, or something like that. If
The
that,
rural
if that's the
committee can
state.
redraft it as a recommendation that's more specific. That's, I mean, that's, right?
Sure.
Sure, yes, I
Wow.
mean, one of the things I didn't want to do is duplicate efforts that are already underway, which is why I put in there the 10-year plan.
Yeah.
Is if there is something that we support as a concrete next step that's happening in the state, then I think that could be part of an action plan. To say that the Climate Commission endorses and will
Well,
help work towards.
one potential way we could do that is to make sure that the voice of our commission is heard in that report, in
Right.
that plan, right? To
Okay,
say that,
yeah.
that broadband isn't just an economic development piece, it's not just a quality of life piece, it's a climate change solution.
Yes.
So I would take that to mean, Peter, that we would say, an action plan would be to ensure that the Department of Public Services 10-year telecommunication plan includes a provision that recognizes broadband as a climate change issue, for instance.
Yes.
Well
Well,
said.
well, wait, is it recognized or does it also build an implementation plan to get us somewhere?
Well, I would submit this, Paul, at a minimum, recognizing is a step that is today not being taken.
We've had two governors establish full universal broadband goals. We've had 20 years back there, we've had the DTA.
No, I meant specifically recognition in the 10-year telecom plan.
Okay.
I agree with everything that's been said, and I wholeheartedly, but I also worry a little bit, I sort of relate back to that pie chart of greenhouse gas emissions. Where's the big numbers, how do we reduce that, and how does this change those numbers directly? And I'm having trouble sort of being able to put a dollar amount and a percent reduction to this.
Yeah, that would be.
So that's, and yes, we need to do that, but it's also a huge thing. If we only have our voice be impactful, we just have to be careful of how broadly how many things we promote.
I'm just concerned about finalizing this in a 2-week period that we have to, before we send a provisional recommendation to the governor, knowing that we have till June to work. And that this is an issue that's got 20 years of work behind it and leadership from DPS already. But I'm open, obviously, we're open to whatever works for the group, and we're gonna be voting on this as a provision in one way or another. I wanna give Robert the last word, and then we need to go on to, and then Joey, and then Yes, Robert.
I'm trying to tie this back into the CEP, and when I looked at the CEP and searched for the words information technology, it came up in the context of the grid. And so I really don't know, but it seems like this is where the two pieces come together for me. I don't know where it goes.
I think we can explain it better because there are multiple intersections.
Yeah.
There's,
Yeah, it's a big
there's,
one.
there's
Yeah.
a, there's, you know, internet-based education opportunities for people not having to travel. There's work-based opportunities for people not having to travel. There's, as Peter Bourne described, it is to drive a fuel oil truck out to somebody's house to only find out that their fuel oil tank is full because they didn't tell them that they also installed a heat pump and they don't use as much fuel oil.
Which is an
There's a ton to it. It doesn't answer Bob's question of how would you monetize all that value, because it's infinite. Having a business that's working in the global economy in a small town is infinitely valuable, and we have thousands of them. But what do we do is there's no do in this so far. So Linda, Joey, you wanted to say something, and then we should go on, and we'll have a chance to.
Well, just to build up a few good points that people have already made, and I think it's important, but to ensure that it is tied to the CEP and is a climate mitigative strategy, I think this should be recognizing and/or we should build accompanying policies or approaches that relate to what Bethany was saying in terms of prioritizing investment in our compact community centers with affordable housing and other, policies that keep our forests as forests, because that was, the #1 singular recommendation that came out of Governor Douglas's Climate Commission. Because my concern is if we don't do that, then I worry about how it might accelerate rural, living out in lovely, hinterlands as opposed to the urban jungle like I do, seems attractive if you can work there, but I worry about it potentially having cost implications on climate risk.
That larger smart growth agenda, I think, is
So I would like to
important.
tie it to that in some way, if not even this categorically in here.
in the next 2 weeks.
Yes.
Okay, so
Very
that's on,
good.
this is all on the table. Let's turn to the transportation electrification platform that we've got here. And we've got the long edition that we've all studied thoroughly. And we all have the background information. We also have, within the committee, a short form that really goes directly into their action recommendations. And would someone want to speak and summarize this one for us?
Sure.
Thanks, Linda.
So basically, we came from the, as you guys all know, that transportation is the single largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions of all the sectors that are out there. So we focused on two broad topics. One is the electrification of this sector, both for private vehicle use and for public transportation, and expanding public transportation transit options. We felt that those are two of the most significant opportunities that we could put our efforts into. So the two broad recommendations, well, I'll go into what we thought could happen in the legislative session. Just to let you know, at the last minute we were asked, which is why the one that you received was so huge, we were asked to incorporate the distributed generation recommendation and the rural development recommendation and ours all together. So they were all lumped together. So,
Last week.
Yeah, that's why we decided to do a single.
Yeoman's work done.
And that's all in, and that's all in this.
One page, that is what I did at 9 o'clock last night.
Okay.
Okay, so one page.
Beautiful. Okay, so what's
All
it
right.
say?
So the two broad categories are accelerating electrification, promote widespread adoption of EVs, there's a number of ways to do that, and jumpstart the transition of public transit and school buses from diesel to electric. The second is increase availability of public transit options, particularly in rural areas, by combining public and school vehicles wherever possible. We have inefficient use of public vehicles right now. If you combine them, you can actually have more vehicle miles traveled and reduce, especially if they're electric, reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. So in this 2018 legislative session, we wanted to give you both a short term and what the view is to the long-term goal. In the short term, you have to look at infrastructure, so expand the charging infrastructure to all Vermonters. We want to make sure that we're underscoring in each of these that we're focusing on rural and low and middle income Vermonters. We really wanted to underscore that in all the things that we're looking at. So in this charging infrastructure, we want to be sure that every Vermonter has access to fast charging within 30 miles. That's the first one. Maximize the VW settlement set-asides for that. The second is improving rate design. It's really important to encourage not just public investment in charging infrastructure, but also private sector investment, and rate design is going to be a key factor in making that happen. The third is to jumpstart electrification of public transit and school buses by using as much of the VW settlement funds as possible to transition from diesel to electric. On transit, we have learned through the research that we've been doing that there's the possibility of reducing the per vehicle cost if you buy in bulk. So if you buy a large group of them, that's what we're recommending, is focusing on public transit first and begin piloting the school bus program, because we can learn from what's already happening in Massachusetts and pilot that so that we can move forward in that based on what we learned from the pilot program there. The third is to explore public transit options. We recognize that it's going to be difficult to combine public and school buses. We're going to have to work on that, so we need to start the study now so that by a year from now we can actually begin implementing that and move towards combining those routes by a year from now, we hope. Who knows how long it's going to take. And then the fifth piece is really boost consumer awareness, and not just consumer awareness in terms of people who are buying EVs, but also our legislators and our dealers. Our dealers are not doing really anything across the nation to help promote electric vehicles, and we need to work with the dealers in that. Then in the medium to long term, so that you know where we're moving towards, after we've already talked to the VW settlement and recommended that that be utilized for the rapid build-out, then you need to implement it. Make sure that it happens in a way that gets as fast as possible to as many Vermonters as possible, and then provide targeted incentives for EV purchases. And we have a range of funding options for this, and with a particular focus on targeting low to middle income Vermonters and rural Vermonters who right now have the most difficulty in having access to transitioning to EVs. And the third one is to implement the expansion of public transit offerings, because in the short term we want to study it, how you do it, and then implement it. And then the last one is to electrify all public transit and school buses at the time of purchase. So So when you have to, do scheduled replacement of your public transit buses or your school buses, why on earth would you buy a diesel one if that's gonna commit you to 12 more years of carbon pollution? Why don't find ways to have a combination of funds that can help incent at no additional cost to a school district or a public transit agency, do that marginal additional cost, help them make that, choice to electrify at the point at which they have to, replace their vehicles. So that's the package.
I
Yes,
just
Michelle.
want to augment a couple of items that Linda framed up for you, which is the electric utility framework for how utilities are going to be a partner in all of this is a burgeoning area right now. And there's a lot of creative thinking going on. And so part of this is understanding what are the things we can do to work with utility companies to advance all the good ideas they have and the frameworks that they have, and then what's the best way to use the governmental resources to complement or to do different activities. One item that I don't think we ended up capturing in our report because we had so many good ideas, but we've talked about it, is this idea of once we have folks charging their electric vehicles at home at night on, sort of the lowest rate structure they can be on, what if we had an incremental charge that we added to that could then go back, those additional revenues could then go back into more EV infrastructure or incentives and that sort of thing. And so there's a lot of sort of bundling of ideas that would potentially come together.
And that's all in the 12-page version.
Yeah.
I read that this evening for entertaining reading.
And I think, again, that there's going to be, in a year, there'll be more ideas on this. But this would, as Joe described, put in front of the governor and legislature that this is a huge area of innovation and development.
I wanted to add
Specific
just
things-
one other thing I wanted to underscore. In the incentives, we want to make sure, again, for the low and middle income Vermonters, that the incentives be applied to used vehicles as well as new vehicles, because the used vehicle market is really important. Okay, and then, go ahead, you're going to say
Bill.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add that this is a grid issue as well, so the power of production distribution was looking at this. When we have the PUC look at rate design, we're looking, there are a number of factors, obviously the time of use rate, but then how do businesses avoid demand charges when they would have 10 of their employees charging, and then also renewable, solar energy during the day. How do we incentivize using that? So I think it's a really important piece of this is to have the utility commission examine how the best way that the grid is going to work develops.
Okay.
If we're going to get to 55,000.
Yeah, great, thank you, Peter.
I think one of the most interesting discussions that I've heard, and why I like the PUC kind of concept a lot, is it's an avenue to have a thoughtful, educated discussion around all of the issues related to EV charging. And I think as we think about not just funding for kind of creating that virtuous cycle, but we have an opportunity to look now where no other state is to say, how do we think about the funding gap for our transportation network as a whole by thinking about it maybe through our rate design, right? Because ultimately, if we're successful, if we drive what we want to drive, we'll have to figure out how the rest of the state is going to pay for those EV drivers. And we want EV drivers, but we got to recognize that there are public policy trade-offs that we have to account for. And so I think this is a great way to have that holistic discussion so it's across the board, because if we, as we've seen when we have piecemeal conversations, we get down rabbit holes very quickly. And so I think this is a great opportunity to bring that
Is
together.
there more that's essential to be said about this recommendation? Sir?
Just one maybe a nuance on number 4 with the mid to long term, there with electrifying all public transit and school buses at point purchase. Maybe suggest taking out the word all, because the all sort of throw like a mandate, and we don't know whether it's fiscally responsible for the public transits around the state, and we sort of mandated to have to do this. And the other thing I want to mention with school buses is a lot of the school buses are subcontracting with private contractors. The buses are actually yellow, but they're not owned by the school districts. So maybe if we take out the word all, which sounds more like everybody has to or else.
I guess what we're trying to get, we've had discussions internally on that this is just to try and show what the long-term goal is. And at the point of purchase, if you're not gonna, if it's gonna cost you the same to buy a buy a diesel or to buy electric. That's what we're saying, for a school district or for a public transit agency, it's gonna cost you the same. Because we're gonna figure out the funding mechanism that allows you to make that choice for something that's gonna cost you the same in capital costs and save you every single year tax dollars after that on operations and maintenance.
Okay.
And I don't see that, what you just said in here, so
That's in
I
the
really have
12
a problem with
page
this.
version.
You just have a problem with it.
Yeah,
I couldn't vote for it without being.
I'm actually a little uncomfortable with this one too. It feels a little, like heavy hand of the state on people, depending on when it gets implemented. If this is a recommendation we're sending to the governor today, then theoretically it's something we would like to see done relatively soon. If it's something that we're gonna think out and plot out and say when it would be implemented, it's different. But right now it feels like we would be saying that a school district, in Shoreham, that wants to replace its school buses would have to do this. And how much would that cost and what's the level of funding available to do this work now? I know that in the long form, there's a structure that would be in place to do that. Well, that's pretty deeply broad for us to recommend today.
Depends on what the need we're
I understand that. So when we think about what we're recommending today, are we recommending the whole picture or are we recommending the first
No, just the first part.
the first part? And I don't know.
The short-term recommendations.
Yeah, because remember we talked about how we would telegraph some of the long-term concepts in the document?
I see. So
But we wouldn't,
the committee's recommendation is the first 5, knowing that these others are part of
Lead
the
to
longer term.
a longer term thing that we work out over the next 4 months.
That's easier.
So are we putting, is there general agreement around the idea of putting forward those first 5 as the recommendation
For our vote.
for our vote that we'll consider?
Okay, so let's keep that as our general consensus as we look at it, knowing that there's great thinking behind this in terms of deeper steps over time.
Which you will all read tonight, actually.
We've read it.
Okay.
We've read it.
It's only 12 pages, it's not very
So,
long.
time out, we're ready to turn the corner, we've got the ideas on the table, we're gonna turn and we're gonna vote on these in just a few minutes, but Peter's taking over to do a review of other ideas we haven't had time to talk about in the last 5 months, and there's a lot, obviously.
I've been incredibly impressed with the dialogue that we just had that got through, we were only 15 minutes behind timeline for thoroughly reviewing 7 very detailed proposals. This is impressive. I think there may be other things that people want to bring up. I will open the floor to it now, but thank you all for a dialogue that has continued throughout this period to be constructive, and many times commissions can devolve, and I feel like we've stuck together and worked through lots of things where there's not necessarily always agreement. So thank you all very much, and open the floor to any new ideas. Bob?
I would just point out, we all had other sort of priorities that didn't get flushed out. Smart growth was one of the ones with our committee that seems like it's a major sort of components to this and needs more work for some policy or thought.
Maybe we should have a list on the wall that we take into 2018. The smart growth agenda, it feels like,
It was part of our transportation discussion too.
Part of every discussion, right? It's the
Yeah.
critical piece of this
It's
whole
all like
process.
using less.
Well, so that one way is we potentially include, whereas I think that there's a specific recommendation related to broadband in here. Smart growth could be something that we do include in the introduction that says, we think this is a critical pathway to reaching the goals. Ted, you look like you're excited.
Well, just one idea that was talked about in our group that didn't get a meat on the bone before today was related to transportation electrification, which was electric vehicle leasing program that expands people's ability to get into an electric vehicle in a more flexible term. I don't know if the right place to put that is within the transportation electrification recommendation. I know there are utilities in the state that are looking into something that came out of the Climate Economy Conference, and there's interest in some of the private sector in pursuing this. There might be some really low-hanging fruit that suggests that the governor support the private sector in their attempts to advance this. That may be just folded into transportation electrification, or maybe a standalone recommendation.
is that a recommendation, Linda, that would be something that could be an amended line that would add in?
Yes, we should have included that because we talked about that and it's something we all support.
transportation, that idea of supporting the ability of utility, government encouraging utilities and other private sector partners to build electric leasing programs in Vermont. Is that it?
Bill?
One thing that was mentioned in the long report of transportation and didn't make it here, I just want to show Linda that I actually read it. But when the governor spoke, we're talking about the VW settlement money, and he mentioned the support of clean diesel. I would love to have us in our transportation heavily recommend that clean diesel is not the way to go. I mean, this is me personally speaking, that if we are electrifying our transportation, that we're gonna get a lot more cost benefit, out of going towards electric vehicles than clean diesel.
I'm just gonna abstain from that conversation as the implementation arm for that money, so.
Does the transportation committee want to put a sentence to that effect in its recommendation?
It is in the longer one.
It is?
It's, I'll leave that up to Michelle.
Wow.
Well, if it's in the longer one, we're really kind of adopting the story of the longer one.
I mean, we can integrate that into the narrative for this recommendation.
And I think we called it efficiently, something we call it, but anyway, I mean, the point was made in the longer term, in the longer term.
Okay.
That if a choice is to be made in the use of VW settlement funds, we strongly support the utilization of those funds for electrification, rather than more efficient diesel that's going to keep us tied for the next 12 years to diesel.
I'm a little concerned about how close they were getting to the weeds here. This is not what I signed up for today. I signed up to vote on the recommendations that we have. I want to have a more granular conversation about whether we could perfectly be doing good here. So that's all I'm gonna say for now. I appreciate the push, Bill, and, but, I, as a member of that committee, in this ex officio, I'm not comfortable with blocking the language that absolutely requires off of, clean these words.
Did you look at the language in that? Is it,
I think I'm wanting to vote.
you're okay with it or you're not okay with it?
I'm really okay with having a further, more granular discussion about what our committee.
Oh, yeah.
can put in these
That's why we stuck with this.
I guess I would just offer that the VW process has its own public engagement process and its own ability to provide recommendations and directives. So I don't know that this committee needs to be communicating to that committee specifically in that manner.
I think the path that we have chosen, or may choose to weigh in on that process is appropriate for our mission. And I would ask all, those present, both sitting at the table and around the room, that we have a public comment period open now until January 13th. Please, by all means, comment on how you believe the state should spend those VW funds. There is specific criteria associated with it in terms of what we can spend it on in terms of projects. And I recommend searching for that website on our very confusing state website to be able to find that information. We want to hear what folks have to say. Okay?
I've got a placeholder one for 2018, a longer term discussion that the Power Production Distribution Committee started, which was weighing in on how we fund the transportation system in a world that switches to electrification. So making sure that we don't ignore, when we move in that direction, we're creating a bit of another challenge, and we should weigh in on that at some point.
Well, so could I counter that I think the proposal that I was making earlier was that we include that in under consideration in the PUC proceeding, that discussion about long-range funding be included as part of that process. Look, it doesn't have to be something that we're making a change right now, but we have to indicate to everybody that we're serious about solving this problem, because there are many people out, in the legislature, in other words, who see this budget gap happening, and we need to, make sure that we're part of the solution.
Peter, I just want to tag on this. I don't want to be too generous in what the PUC can and cannot is redress. And I think the point Mary's raising is absolutely essential. It may well be bigger than something the PUC can resolve. We're talking about fundamental information tax policy. And they do a lot of things at the PUC, they do, but that's not one of them.
So it feels to me like another idea that has to hit the table, but that isn't ready for, we haven't had time, is the enormous importance of agriculture drawdown, the fact that we need to put carbon into the soil, the fact that we have a major water issue in Vermont, and the conjuncture between energy generation, carbon sequestration, and water is an area where there could be businesses developed that make money and answer the problem. And some already are, like.
No, but, this is one of the items I was just gonna put out there, to just keep it on the table, even if this committee doesn't pursue it, but, we're meeting about, biofuels and oilseed production. We see where water quality and air quality intersect in every single way. So we have a lot of agricultural lands, they are carbon sinks, and we don't even discuss that here, which I feel is missing.
We had a committee started on it, and we got a little ways, but we didn't get to where we have a coherent platform. So we know we have more work to do, and that's all I'm saying, is we need to do more.
I think we'll come back to a lot of the discussion on, there are many things that we have not dug into enough. I think we all recognize that. 7 recommendations and the gamut of things we could be discussing is not there. I think that the piece that Marie raises is a good one, because we had a concept of combining sort of incentives for anaerobic digestion and air quality pieces and the removal of phosphorus to meet lots of different goals. And the Clean Water Fund Board moved forward with that as a proposal for existing digesters. We'd like to see it as a greenhouse gas thing for new digesters, but they've moved forward with it, so I think we can continue to think through some of those processes. I'm going to suggest that 5 minutes, well, are there any other ideas to put on the table? Bethany?
Thank you. I actually have a lot of ideas, but I want to say that I have them and we can discuss after this first round of recommendations go through. But I guess my focus is, in talking to transportation folks around the state, is trying to think of things that are, impactful and maybe kind of like not expensive, simple, cheap, homegrown Vermont style things that aren't, that we aren't necessarily thinking about, aren't very, very shiny, but hopefully not.
Great.
So we'll talk about this in January.
I guess I want to raise one possible concept that I think, I think is a potential option. One of the things that we've seen great work out of the utilities is through the creativity of their Tier 3 programs, how they spend that money around within their geographic territories, their service territories, and they're all working to try to keep up with each other and offer similar programs. I think there's an opportunity, traditionally we've avoided any sort of cross-pollination between the utilities because there's concern about, how that would work. But I think in this instance, if we were to create a permissive environment where one utility could agree with another utility to share a program and both get Tier 3 credit for it, then we have the potential to expand the range of offerings available to Vermonters across the board. So a small municipal power company that doesn't have the staff or capacity to offer significant programming, but a GMP or a BED or something like that does, then there's an opportunity for collaboration only if they want to. I'd be interested to hear folks. I raise it now because I think it's a relatively simple solution that we could think about with not a lot of traps.
I just support that 100%. I think that's a really, really good idea, and I think Tier 3 has potential that has largely untapped potential that needs to be tapped more. And that's one way of doing it.
All right. Any other ideas? All right. Let's go to the voting round. Everybody remembers what all the changes we made throughout this process. Okay, let's start back at the beginning. I believe the only change that was designated out of the advanced wood heating proposal was to add in both of the, for the, all change, any sort of purchase was a sales tax exemption piece to that.
Just a point of clarification, are we trying to get down to 2 or 3 proposals? So we can put all
We
7,
have,
whatever we want?
we're asked for at least 3.
Okay, great, thank you.
So, I believe we should have some discussion about maybe prioritization within the report, or we can just simply do it alphabetically as we've done here today. But I think that speaks to sort of, we can, if we come to consensus or close to it via our voting procedures, then I think we should do it. And just remember as a note that Paul will be voting on behalf of Stu Hart, and Linda will be voting also on behalf of, yes, been too long speaking, thank you.
Peter, I need to leave at 3:30. I
Yep.
apologize to my fellow commissioners, and I'll go as far as I can, and then Mary's gonna be my proxy.
Okay, thank you.
Just one last point of clarification, so we discussed all these proposals before, comments were made, but should I be assuming every comment made was adopted and therefore a change was made?
I think what I would propose that we go through now is that, as I've described with the biomass, the only potential change on the table is to add the sales tax piece. I would look for a motion to approve the recommendation with that piece added or not for the group. And then as we get into some where there are other changes made, we can make a specific recommendation based on, the 5, for the transportation, it could be, I recommend we move forward with the 5 in the short term, plus the 10th edition of the EV leasing piece. That's the sort of approach I would see us taking, so we capture those changes.
And are we gonna see these one more time?
Yes, you will.
Thank you.
But this is your intent vote.
Right, right, here's the one we're gonna take to the next step.
We won't meet again.
So I move that we adopt the investor biomass heating recommendation as amended to include the sales tax exemption in both the residential and commercial sections.
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions? We will do a full count of everybody, so if we get into one where there isn't consensus, we will go through and include those voting totals for the public record, but that one was easy. Thank you. We now move on to the building retrofit discussion.
So, just to start things moving, I would move that we adopt the building retrofit recommendation less the requirement for a building grading system. And it should be adopted as a piece of our
Adopted as a mandatory or?
No, just
voluntary?
just strip it completely from this proposal. Just the grade.
Can I add a point of clarification? I think that it's worth, especially with I know we're talking about these are ideas and we want to push for them, but I think the bonding one is very specifically that there are lots of questions that can be answered. And I recommend that we include in that language that, that recognizes that there's much work to be done for that large amount of money.
And specifically, may I ask for, like, I'm interested in looking at it at the level of like 25 million, 50 million, I mean.
Right,
I think
isn't the right amount of money.
Yeah, but I think we should not put our shoulder behind 100 million. I think we should put our shoulder behind exploring bonding as a powerful tool to actually do what we want to do as swiftly as possible, knowing how, like, the cost of that. So I'm interested in specifically maybe suggesting some lower numbers, like giving examples. They don't have to be, that would be my recommendation.
Wondering if the administration can weigh in on that. I don't know what level does it start to affect our bond rating and maybe other factors, but I think some feedback from somebody within the administration would be helpful at this point with respect to that. What do the fees support in terms of bond? And we have a revenue stream identified, we don't know what that is, so that's not so hard to do. I'd second that motion, by the way.
To include, Maybe we should start over since we've had some
Let me
discussion.
withdraw my motion.
Thank you.
Your motion?
And perhaps restate a motion? So I move that we adopt the building retrofit recommendation, striking the building grading system and adding clarification that it is a recommendation that the governor consider using some of the weatherization money to bond up to a multiple year commitment, depending on the financial prudence of doing so and its effect on the state's bond rating and other financial obligations. Is that,
Can I move to modify that?
please do.
The only reason I say that is I think there's more in here than the weatherization bond and the labeling requirement. So I'm wondering if you could move to take out and make standalone the weatherization piece.
I remove my motion.
Unless because there's a whole bunch of other things in here about funding that aren't related to the weatherization.
Right. I do agree with you that it wouldn't flow appropriately. Those things flow nicely with the grading thing that we seem to have, movement to continue to work on. So is there a motion that, Mary, are you making a motion to use text language around the weatherization and our exploration of it, but solely that out of this recommendation?
So taking out funding.
How about if we, so there were two components to this proposal. One was the imperative to require it, and the second was to subsidize this. So everything flows if you take out the imperative, but keep the subsidies. But we don't know we need more work to say what is the bond and what's the revenue stream. So understanding that, it needs to be reworked in that way. And again, not to sort of start that up again, but I do think that it's important to note that between buildings and transportation, that's 75% of our carbon emissions in the state. So if we really are going to move the dial, we need something on buildings, and we personally think we need something on buildings and transportation. That has to be.
Yeah, it feels to me like the starting point of this is that we don't have a market signal now on efficiency. So you add value to a property, it doesn't show up in the marketplace. And there's been a discussion that's gone on for several years about establishing a mandatory MLS efficiency measure that would be available in the time of sale, in the building assessment. So when you're buying a building, you know, and people who are putting in new efficiencies, it would show up in the market value of the house. And so as a starting point, you would have made market consciousness, and people would be making decisions based on the efficiency, the work that you've done. And you'd also have a sense that you're getting a payback from the value of the home. And even that as a step would be a great thing to accomplish. It hasn't been done, and it would be really a terrific thing to do. If you did that in connection with weatherization bonds, that exactly how those dollars get spent, we don't articulate every detail, but know that partnership would be developed, and that with the governor's leadership and legislative evaluation, it's an idea that may be worth consideration. So,
Are you saying keep the grading, don't make it a requirement?
I'm saying, you build in a mandatory MLS listing with a standard that allows people to judge the efficiency of homes. And the Climate Progress for Vermont report has a pretty specific outline of how that could happen. And I know there's a lot of work on that.
There's work happening now on homes and getting labeling into the MLS. So that's why I wonder, it sounds like the intention was to keep them together, so I'm sorry for saying that they should be ripped apart. But I agree there should be something in there. I think as a commission, we should do something about buildings. We should recommend something about buildings. It's a big deal. And I wonder if we have 2 weeks. I mean, is it possible for us to get together? You're giving me a very no. To try to rework the labeling side of this? And
I think there seems to be enough consternation about that approach, and there's work going on already, that I don't think we're gonna solve that in 2 weeks. I would rather have a more thoughtful conversation about it in the coming months, where we can find out where people are and see how we support that effort that's ongoing to get those market signals in the market. I don't think we're gonna solve that in 2 weeks.
Yeah, I will, one other comment on that. I don't think, Paul originally talked about measures and then whether our measures would be sufficient. I don't think without some imperative to force people to change that the money alone is gonna be sufficient to move the number of times. So what that is,
Right.
I don't know, but something more, I think, is needed in funding. So,
I agree with that, comment. I think that there does have to be some sort of market incentive, whether it's the grading scale or what, Paul was saying. And I think that they probably should go hand in hand.
Yeah, I hear what both of you are saying, but we don't know what it is, so we
Right.
probably shouldn't propose it till we.
Does that mean that we don't propose anything?
I don't know.
Well, they're gonna talk about the weatherization bond only, so it would be about residential, but not about labeling.
you could, just like the transportation proposal, sort of imply that this is where we're headed. So note it and say, this is
We need
important,
to-
this piece, we're gonna be working on it, and here's the funding piece that perhaps is ready to go, or can be ready to go. I'm not sure it's ready yet. Yeah,
I'd be ready.
I think that could be
I wouldn't.
Yeah, I mean, I think that seems reasonable. I think we all need to see language to some extent to be able to answer that question. So that could be one of the first things that we work on trying to suss out. But I think that there is value in that sort of saying, we know that we need to get to greater market, information for people to make better decisions. We are working on that concept. In the interim, we've heard this idea, it's got a lot of potential. We can't evaluate its as, in sort of Ted's very well articulated words as to, whether or not it makes sense for us. And that's how I would propose we proceed.
second.
I was just gonna, I support that, because I think it allows us to have something now that talks about buildings, which I think we need to have something now that talks about buildings to recognize that we recognize how important it is. And we can say we're exploring market signals that we recommend exploring over the next several months. Market signals, we sort of did some of the language in the transportation one. To start the action now so that by the time we come to June, we'll have something more definite to propose. So just say, explore the options both for market signals that include MLS, and these are just options to explore, MLS or labeling or whatever, however language you want to have.
I feel
And
very
funding.
uncomfortable with the idea of putting forward options when we don't know what the universe looks like. Because that's suggesting.
Among others, you could
But
say.
we
have
always get in the among others discussion, and the problem is then we end up only looking at those options. And I don't think that's an appropriate place for us to be when we don't know where we want to go.
Sounds like you could make some language, you say we're gonna explore that side of the coin, whatever that is. I mean, we don't have
Yeah.
to put the options.
Could I just suggest that we can explore, we don't have to tell the governor we're gonna do something. What we need to tell the governor is what are we actually recommending right now? And I apologize, I'm under pressure time as well. Riley Allen will need to go before we get to 40. So, the one concern I have is that we're not requiring anything. I can grab the microphone to what my concerns are. I just want to make the point that we're free to continue to explore things without having to put the resolution.
I think I agree with what you just said.
You do, you
Didn't
do.
hear it completely on your.
I was buttering against my teacup, so.
We can carry that forward, and we can do that work in
Right.
January and beyond. We're asking for the governor's recommendation. We're
Exactly.
recommending to the governor what actions to take.
I do think it's important that we sort of show what the road forward is, and I agree that we don't have to be specific about it, but I do think that we need to say what we're gonna do that's gonna help implement what's happening, right now, because otherwise I worry again that we're gonna go down a different road than the governor's going down, and then I don't know if I'm articulating how well, but.
I think in many of these, we'll have sort of tiebacks to this is what's going on in this sector, and we know it needs attention. These are the actions we recommend you take now, while we consider lots of other things. Like that's easy to articulate. That speaks to June's. We don't need to nobody cared. I hate to say it, but we know our work, but we don't have to show it to justify the recommendations we're making.
So just in terms of process here, I'm completely confused about what we can be voting on until somebody puts a motion on the floor and we can.
Yeah.
So I'd
Do
like
you have a
to,
motion on the floor?
No, we don't have a motion.
You withdrew your last motion.
so I would almost say that we skip this one for the moment, that you guys put together something we can discuss and amend if necessary in a formal way and vote on that, because right now I don't know what we're voting.
We're not gonna have another chance to discuss between now and when we recommend.
No,
You're
no, I
saying
meant
at the
just
end of the
postpone,
voting?
move to the next, and give these folks a chance to write out a motion.
Do we have a motion to table this to the end of the voting conversation?
So let's just get a motion out. Let your motion
So I think, well, before I make a motion, what I've heard is the committee's gonna continue working on, part one of this proposal. And we're going to vote potentially on a separate standalone motion on the advancement of the weatherization bond, or as we're calling it here, the Warm Homes Program, correct?
Yes.
So what I would then say, I would move that we adopt the building retrofit recommendation that the governor consider utilizing the existing fuel tax receipts to create a state bond to fund scaling up the current programs for low-income Vermonters and debt for working-class owners, at a level to be determined by, the administration. So that we're not saying it's gotta be $100 million, that's the point of my motion.
Yeah.
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you.
So there's one abstention.
One abstention over there.
You gotta take my notes off, thanks.
Is there anything we could do, before we go any further, in the interest of trying to get to unanimous vote, is there anything we could do that would clarify the motion that would?
Okay, hold on, yeah, sorry,
I actually have language that we worked with Neil on extensively that describes the framework. If you want to see this, and we, as we edit these together, we could be using any of this language.
Yeah, let me see that. I'll let you know.
Bethany reserves her right to remove her abstention. All right, so moving to carbon pricing, I think the consensus seemed to be a independent study that looks at the potential mechanisms to move us towards our climate change goals, that did not get into specific policy options directly in its naming, and was conducted by an independent third party, contracted through the CFO as recommended in here. And the language is new, so.
Knowing there'll be a little bit of editing between the version on the table and the two versions, but that carry that agenda. I move that one.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Unopposed.
Any abstentions?
What did you call this study? There were some
I think
words in that.
the last language that we used was an independent study for market-based climate mitigation.
Okay.
That comes from Michelle. So that's the title on the new draft.
Wait, we need to go back to that, because after Michelle mentioned that, I had mentioned that this really ought to cover the full range of options, as you recall, that it could be a straight command and control regulatory piece.
We captured that as part of the edited notes. Does that need to be part of the title?
I think it should be a part of the title.
It's not just market rates.
For climate mitigation?
I I think we can work on the title to make it a little clearer, but I think that is the intent, to have the study cover the range of potential options and its pros and cons.
I'll do a draft, pass it to Peter, Peter will we'll all take a look at it before it's done.
Do we need to, do we want to revote that? Does anybody want to change their vote based on the naming?
I don't understand what the new thing is.
We don't have a new name.
We don't have a new name. The idea is that so this is, the study is designed to look at, all approaches to potentially reducing greenhouse gas emissions, one of which is a more of a regulatory approach that says, thou shall reduce your emissions by so much, which is one end of the spectrum.
So that we had this earlier discussion of regulatory, and everyone nodded that that could be included, so I included it in the notes that would be part of the redraft, whether it's part of the title exactly.
I just have, would that study allow for looking at something like having it, for example, as opposed to what some people in the legislature are proposing, having it fund weatherization, for example? Is it broad enough to allow for that?
It absolutely is essential to that discussion. We talked about the fact that there were 5 different models of climate, of carbon pricing that had been introduced in the last couple of years, including the first one from Energy Independent Vermont that had provision of dollars that would go to weatherization and other investments long term. So there's that whole gamut of ideas in terms of looking at the best economic return on investment in line with all the different mission goals that we talked about earlier would be included in that potential study.
I think that gets to scoping, which was the other piece that we had talked about, whether or not we want to add this recommendation in, and I'm sorry I didn't bring it up, was the idea where we offer a subset of this commission to act as a work group for the legislature to develop that, to help them with that scoping.
And I included that in the draft as well, that would say that some of us could work to help frame the scope and the way that things could.
Because those are going to be assumptions that go into the study. Across the board.
I'm wondering with the sort of regulatory or shall follow law, is that already part of the CEP or is there currently no? I thought there's no goal during that.
No, it's not a goal-based approach. It's simply saying you have to reduce, we all have to meet our carbon emissions. It's a non-market-based approach to regulating carbon.
Why do we want to?
Well, an analysis might show there's ways to use the regulatory system to reduce carbon emissions as part of this platform, and that would be useful for us to know. It feels to me like we already voted on it, and that unless anyone objects to that, we should just go forward. I'm not hearing it.
All right, the climate czar proposal. Lots of good discussion there. I think there are a couple pathways we could go. We think there's value in accentuating the need for a backbone, but is that a management issue? Is that how do we address that? And then the real substance of the idea within the document speaks to understanding our workforce development needs. So we could potentially put that forward as a standalone concept. That was the basis of the discussion that we had during that conversation, and would be interested in what anybody would like to move.
I don't necessarily want to move anything yet, but I think you articulated what the intent was very well, thank you. But also to underscore, not just to look at the gaps, but to identify what are the opportunities that this person was singularly tasked and not clearly a lot of people at the state government doing a lot of this work in very important, good ways. But if there was someone singularly tasked, we could look at the opportunities engaging our private
was just gonna say that I don't know that I have any knowledge of whether this is a limiting factor in effectively executing what's happening. We're a little bit uneducated as to what's happening and how we're executing now to know if this is the right solution. And probably therefore would suggest that maybe we need more information to work on this over the next several months rather than putting this forward as a recommendation now.
So is that a motion?
That's just how I feel about it.
I'm about to turn into a pumpkin. If I'm here in time for the vote, I'm going to vote against this, but I don't want to be misunderstood. I think the need for emphasis and privacy is very clear. But this to me very much seems like a how do we use what we've got proposal, not an imperative to create a new office or a new position to bring laser focus, as Jeremy was describing. And I really don't think this is something that the governor needs to go to the legislature for unless we're trying to create that position. So this is an idea that I would welcome for the discussion about later. But today I would vote no.
If there's a motion.
And I would like to turn it to pumpkin. So if you want to let me my vote, maybe.
So is there a motion on this one?
I'll make a motion that we table this and add it to our long-term investigation so that the state agencies that are working on this, in this arena, can provide more information to the commission with regards to what we're doing already. That's a motion.
I would second that.
All those in favor?
Of tabling it?
Well, of tabling.
Aye.
All opposed?
I think I'm opposed.
Opposed to tabling it? Any abstentions?
So then we have a majority.
Yeah, you did.
We had everybody with June.
You most certainly did. I think it was okay.
Yeah,
No,
because I would have liked to have just voted yes or no. There's so many good
That's
things
what I
to move
wanted.
forward with. I think this one we can maybe put aside and go
Well,
forward.
we did kind of put it aside, but we also said that thinking about the structure of carrying this conversation forward in state government is something that we want to come back to before we're done.
I agree.
seems like
Yeah,
a
I think this is
valid-
something.
My motion was to table it for longer term investigation.
Yes.
Not to.
And I voted
set
against
this.
it because I thought we were right for up and down. And I was-
Oh, okay, good.
We're good.
Okay, well, let's move on to fostering the Vermont climate economy. As we discussed with this one, this is a series of very specific recommendations that we think are worthy of exploration. And so I think in that vein, I'd say that I would look for somebody make a motion to approve as drafted, or maybe as drafted with a little more attention paid to existing businesses.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd move to adopt the fostering the Vermont climate economy summer report as our recommendation, as long as we, with the slight amendment of emphasizing the growth in existing businesses, and by amending the action plan by adding the words, recommend adopting policies to promote, to foster the Vermont climate economy businesses, including but not limited to.
Where are you?
On bullet 5 action plan. So I think that ensures that the list is not considered comprehensive, and also that, in my opinion, that language is the endorsement, no, Joe may not like that, of these particular items. And I recognize they are not perhaps the only ways to do this, there may be others there.
I'm delighted to accept your motion as written. I'll even second it.
Motion on the table?
All those in favor, or sorry, motion's been seconded, all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Any abstentions? And, Mary, did you vote for,
Kristen?
Kristen on the last one?
Yes.
And just that one?
say two ayes.
So the next one, transportation, what?
Is rural broadband. The concept was to make this more specific, to make sure that it is a component of the 10-year plan that the department is working on currently. We have a motion on this issue. Move
To modify the existing recommendation, so there's a specific recommendation that the 10-year telecommunications plan recognizes the climate imperative of high-speed internet access.
And infrastructure. Infrastructure and access.
Yes, yes. Some version of that language,
Can I just be, I'm just curious if there is any way to add to it, just to sort of underscore that we see this as a climate opportunity, but we want to make sure that I just am really interested in like not putting our shoulder behind this. I do also find it ironic that the FCC just moved to element neutrality while we're having this conversation. But what I'm trying to say is that I think it's important, but I want to make sure that we recognize there will need to be accompanying policies like, or efforts like promoting compact community development and stopping forest fragmentation, like other things, promoting affordable housing so we can give people options to live.
so the concern is that a huge push behind ubiquitous broadband could encourage sprawl.
Yeah, without recognizing that, you know, yes, that is my concern. I'm channeling my colleague Kate McCarthy.
Yeah, and I guess we've already made a statement as a state that there is a huge push for ubiquitous broadband. So I guess I'm feeling a little conflicted on this.
But we're the Climate Action Commission.
Yeah.
So I'm just, that's the point I'm trying to raise.
How would you maybe word
I guess I would just put it in as just to say that this is a recommendation from the Climate Commission, recognizing that there's also need and attention and work to be done in X, like those few things, and if other people have other ideas, I
think we can do that for all of the other ideas too, and I worry about where that goes. I understand exactly what you're saying.
I just don't know, like, the Climate Commission, I mean, like, those are my concerns, putting our, you know.
I'm absolutely devoted to broadband. I've been working on it for 20 years. Everybody is. What are we saying that's new, other than that this is part of the climate economy, which is already documented in this and lots of other thinking by people? To me, this isn't equivalent with the others because it's not an action step that the governor needs to take. The commissioner's going to put it in the plan anyway. It's part of the plan anyway. It's always in the plan. We don't have the $200 million to invest in broadband infrastructure right now to complete the last mile. And so I don't really, to me, it just doesn't seem like it's equivalent, and that we have a thing that we want the governor to actually do as a result of this. So to me, I'm not going to support it.
Can I maybe make a motion that finds some balance point between that? We happen to have a member, you know, from the Public Service Department here, either Junior now Riley. I don't think this doesn't necessarily need the governor's step, right? We can simply say, we recommend that the Public Service Department include climate change as a portion of their consideration in this plan. And that could include the potential ramifications, but it speaks to our goals.
Right.
We do a second recommendation for public service.
Well, I think we could simply include this in the meeting notes for this meeting and simply, and I'd be happy to draft something on behalf of the commission and sign it on our behalf if people are comfortable with that approach.
But we should vote this down, I think.
Well, I think we're making a motion to
We're not having a motion. Unless
There's a
someone wants
motion
to
on
make a
the-
motion.
There's a
I
motion
can,
on
I
the
can
table.
withdraw my motion.
Closed and seconded.
Okay, no, not sure if it's consensus.
But before we go there, I'd say, when I equate this to my department, the Agency of Commerce and Community Development's dedication to childcare. You know, we recognize childcare is a fundamental need to foster economic growth. And it's in everything we talk about. You talk about childcare. Broadband is a fundamental need to solve climate change, to address the climate economy. So, I would simply think that having a statement of principle that says that as part of this would not be a bad thing and would reinforce that fact, that this is in fact a necessary.
That's why I suggested earlier that it would be in the introduction, because we have to define what the climate economy is. There's a definition in here. Peter could draft from that something that seems to fit consensus that says universal broadband is an essential part of. Unless we're proposing that the governor build a new universal broadband goal and put resources behind it, what are we actually saying by just saying broadband is important as a recommendation? So I would put it in as an introduction rather than as a recommendation personally. But there's a motion on the floor, and maybe we should vote on that, or I don't.
What is the motion?
Well, Peter's.
Peter,
I'm just commenting.
What a co-chair.
The motion on the floor was to approve the recommendation with the inclusion of the specific recommendation relative to the 10-year plan of the department.
Point of order, can the person who made the motion remove it even though it's been seconded?
Do we have to remove the second first?
Who's second?
Oh, no.
Well,
Mayor,
let's,
just the mayor on the
I know.
what do we vote on the
Withdraw.
I'm happy to withdraw the motion and reconsider. It sounds like there's a lot more going on here with this. than I had.
I'm gonna make some motion. Can I make a motion, Mr. Chair? I'm gonna pass on chair.
If you want to do it by Robert's rules.
They could suggest a motion.
I would suggest the motion that we include language in support of universal broadband within the introduction to the report that we provide to the government.
I'll make that.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you.
I'm sorry, can I speak?
Yep.
So we're withdrawing any vote on further action, any action-oriented motion around broadband. And so this doesn't have the same standing as the other recommendations that are coming from.
That is the intent of the body, based on that.
Okay.
Yep. All right, so last but not least, rural for transportation electrification. We have discussed doing the 5 pieces of the short-listed action items, plus the item added by Mr. Ted Brady on the EV leasing proposal. Is there a motion related to that?
I make that motion that we accept the 6 platforms, EV transportation.
Yes. All those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so
I had a question. With the building retrofit, I thought that we only voted on amendment rather than voting on the whole thing. But
I think I felt that way too.
we voted on pulling out the
weatherization.
Weatherization.
And then we never voted on
We
it.
never voted on them.
How we're tabling it?
Well, we recognize, I think there's a lot of really great stuff in there that we want to work on over the course of the next.
So we're sending the weatherization with a little side note about our thoughts. Is that right?
We're sending the weatherization period. We are continuing to work in January and beyond on that issue.
I guess I would motion that we include sort of where we see this going, just so that they have a better sense of what will.
So what we did talk about was making sure, so in all these recommendations, they're framed by the emissions sector they come from, right? And so to say, in the buildings, we have work to do to meet our goals, and this is the first step we recommend in that process. So it speaks to the fact that we know that there more is required.
I just wonder if we could be a little more specific about what directions we think that more could go in. I don't know.
Yeah. If we're going to reference it all, then we're going to continue looking at market signals for building.
Because it feels to me with like transportation, we have sort of, these are what we want now, these are where we're thinking about going, and we don't have that.
Well, in fact, we just voted on transportation, we just voted on the short-term recommendations.
I thought we were sending this entire document.
No, we voted on the short-term recommendations in the transportation act.
I don't think we have enough clarity. I think we have a lot more work to do, and it's important, right? Like Bob said, this is one of the most fundamental things we've got to be working on. And we have a couple adopted and voted to approve those, unless we want to go into that. But it feels like we need to flesh them out to get the clarity to be able to do that. We shouldn't be recommending that we go.
I do have we use the word weatherization, and we changed this to building retrofit at a certain point, because weatherization is limiting in terms of how you meet your carbon emissions. There are other ways to do that. Smart buildings, different heating systems. So I know we're using that term weatherization, but I'm wondering if we could just say building retrofit.
How about building energy retrofit?
Sure. So leave those options open. It's not just weatherization.
Everybody okay with that?
That is fundamentally different. The weatherization programs, as they've been implemented, have very specific definitions. It does not include a lot of the other retrofit piece, so I just want to throw that up for your.
That was actually me speaking, not Ken, just so you know.
That's
good.
No, it's true, but I think it's the right thing to do.
So retrofitting would include what things would that include, things like heat pumps and electrical?
Alternative energy, alternative heating, biofuels, a number of things that reduce carbon emissions, smart buildings.
So someone could conceivably be getting a heat pump, but when they should have been getting weatherization. I mean, someone, right?
Yeah, it really won't work without weatherization, but.
Okay, but I mean, but are we?
I think.
I'm just worried that weatherization is kind of like the first step.
Maybe if you'd like, I can speak to that. It's the decision for how to do it is complex.
Right.
Moisture issues,
Yeah.
there's just a bunch of complexity to that. Whereas the outcome, if we're trying to achieve reduction in carbon emissions, there are many ways to do that, and to limit the choices. It seems like it would be better policy to say, get there somehow.
And we're not saying, we haven't,
Right.
none of the weatherization bond piece doesn't get to that at all, right? It's just about
Which is why-
resources for the existing weatherization activities of the state.
Why I
Although
suggest
we're talking about
changing,
changing the language to include.
you just say changes from
Well, you meant to
weatherization.
build in the name of the group, right?
Well, I meant whatever the proposal is. So money to do building retrofit
Right.
as opposed to money just to do weatherization. That's,
To Ken, sir.
Well, the proposal we are moving forward is just on weatherization.
yeah, okay, that is just something that I thought.
I'm gonna.
That is what the language was, but that's what the language of this was.
Yeah.
But this, there's nothing in here that we just weatherization
Right.
or other concepts in it. That's true. And we
Right.
adopted, I thought we were
Missing.
adopting the funding component of this, which was retrofit, not just.
So where we ended up was the pulling out the weatherization proposal and voting on that as a standalone. So we have to revisit that discussion. I think we've lost some voting member,
No, I'll abstain myself, I'll vote for it. Thank you for sending me over. Remember how I abstained from that one? So I
Yeah.
was like, I don't even know that.
Well,
So, I believe, based on counsel from Ken Jones, that the weatherization program is defined in statute, but also that the money we'd be paying for would be from that weatherization statute. So it would be a much bigger deal to expand it beyond weatherization.
I think we should leave it alone.
All right.
But still work, I hope
But
the
yeah.
intent is still
Yeah.
there, to still work on the retrofit
Right.
side.
Yeah, and some useful.
Yeah, I don't know if this is shared by other members, but I'm still a little concerned that we're sending proposals without sort of the background that we all saw within this about where we think we could go. And I don't think that it needs to be a proposal per se, but I think if there was just sort of these are the ideas that have been floating around that could be the next roads that we go down could give more understanding about what proposals we're setting forth.
I agree with that.
I guess I fundamentally disagree because we've all changed, what we've discussed has changed every time we've met, and we're capturing a piece of time that signals someplace where we may go and create an expectation that we're gonna look at something that we may not look at, and so I just fundamentally don't think that's appropriate. We're putting forward a recommendation at a point in time where we, this is what we agree on, and we'll evaluate what else we agree on and we agree on going forward.
Good. If we had no specifics about our ideas, but we just said these are the first steps.
If if you look at the draft of the report, that's exactly what it says, that this is a preliminary set of recommendations. There's significantly more work to do that we will capture in all sectors of this and work towards it because we understand there's more work to be done than just what we're recommending. It's very clear that this is our first step.
Well, the ones that we shared today, those are all public anyway, right? So, people do have access to seeing what the thinking was behind these first steps.
Yeah, I think I'm just not clear.
Yeah, no, but your point is really important, and I think there is public access to that thinking.
Thanks for clarifying.
So let's, I think we're concluded with the voting section. Our upcoming schedule, I want to get to public comments so that we can recognize the folks who have come today to be part of this. I do want to suggest something about our January and February timeframe, that our January meeting will be on us before we know it, because of the holidays and because of the fact that we'll be working on finalizing this report. I would make a recommendation to the commission that we not hold our January meeting and that we hold a one-day, full-day meeting in February and organize topics that we've tabled or that we've considered for further discussion to bring in people to help us consider some of those issues and work with all of you to identify some of those topics that we could build a more effective learning platform around for us all. That would be my recommendation to the commission. And I would be interested in either your thoughts or a motion on that proposal.
I support that motion. I do think that the space of time will be helpful and that a full day of engagement that's well structured that people know and can potentially come and go for would be, I think, a productive path. I'm just curious about kind of the path between now and then, and if we can kind of use and structure that productively so that we lead and are as effective as possible when we do have that full day engagement.
Can I make the suggestion, one second, Joe. Can I make the suggestion that Paul and I discuss how we might draft ideas and come up with an agenda? The other piece that I should have mentioned during that is that I believe it'd be very useful for our subcommittees to continue to meet during that period and to take that step back from the detailed work and say, what is the full breadth of the issue areas we want to consider so that we can prioritize our work going through the spring? That would be the sort of the other piece to that. Joe, I
I guess I really appreciate the idea of like digging deep for a full day. I don't know about, I feel like there's a lot of work to be done, so I don't know about that as opposed to a January meeting. I mean, I feel like there's so much work to be done. I'm interested in rolling my sleeves with you guys and doing it, so can we not do both? I feel like some of this stuff needs to be actually drawn early. I know it's a deep commitment of time, but that's my gut is to say, to actually move on any of these, if they are gonna be short-term recommendations, and then think long-term as well, like, more time, not less, seems helpful.
I would agree with you in that I'm trying to think through what an agenda for January would look like, and the fact that we're presenting these ideas to the governor now, he's gonna need some time to digest them, so the likelihood of us having feedback with a useful amount of time prior to that January meeting is probably unlikely, and so at that point, then we would be, I don't know if we would most efficiently be using our time. That's my only suggestion.
We use that time though to investigate things that we know we are looking for answers on. And I guess the assumption is you were thinking like if the governor nixes something.
No, my response was just to Joey suggesting that there be things that we need to work on.
Well, part of it could be, I mean, to be honest with you, like, I feel like we're all starting from very different levels of, like, perspective and everything else. So one could be, like, brushing off Governor Douglas's climate action report or the total energy study. I mean, so much, I feel like to ground truth us in everything that has been done or the answers that we might need to make leading up to July, maybe that's a big
subcommittee chairs take the discussion from today and all the proposals that were made today and ground them back into the CEP and kind of identify with that as a framework what we haven't touched on in the areas that we've already explored, and perhaps in January propose calls, as you're suggesting, to investigate those things that we still need to do, those pieces that we still need to understand, but to do them in the context of what we've already done and what the plan says already as a recommendation, so that we're not both doing work that's already been done and also recognizing that we're all now invested in this. I think we can come back and ground ourselves in the plan and come back with more specific ideas. If the chairs would do that, I'm certainly willing to participate in phone calls.
I'm just trying to think through the logistics of what you just said. So you're proposing that between now and January, the chairs,
I'd like to see the subcommittee chairs propose meetings with an agenda that reflects a little retrospective after this meeting, prepares us for the next few months. What do we need to know? Where do we need to go? And kind of based on what we've done so far, that the chairs can put a little bit of thought into what needs to happen next, and we can discuss that at the January meeting. So by February, we've got more homework perhaps, but at least we'll have somebody putting some thought into the direction.
And were you saying also having them between now and January, ground it in the CEP year?
That perhaps all of us can do that, but at the very least, we just come back and look at what we've done and look at the CEP and have a discussion about where we need to go next as subcommittees so that we're not losing that opportunity.
So you're suggesting that the January meeting be a subcommittee, not a general meeting of everybody?
Not necessarily a physical.
But use that time and schedule for the subcommittees.
That's fine.
Joey is not proposing that.
I'm interested in that idea. I just feel like there's so much work to do and
I guess it feels to me like we've got a sort of a parking lot of ideas right now. We've got the existing subcommittees that have produced nuggets, some of which need more work and some maybe don't need as much. But we might want to build a list on the wall of what the key priority areas are that we want to explore and consider more deeply. And maybe we configure subcommittees to take on that level of work. I personally, I don't know if I'm the chair of my subcommittee, and I don't know if I want to go out and do the work to ground truth everything in the state energy plan between now and January. I'm tired. So I wonder if Pete's sort of suggesting maybe we could skip a month in January. And I guess the first question is does this group want to skip a month, or do you want to get together in January? And if we did get together in January, maybe we could, Pete's going to have a lot of work to do to follow up on this meeting in terms of framing and bringing to the governor. Maybe we make it less agenda filled, and we get together and we think about what's the list of things we're going to further explore, kind of chart out our next 6 months a little bit, and then we can go to subcommittees and maybe to a larger retreat. But I don't know what the
The other thing, another thought would be, it could be that, and it could be a coalition of the willing, but, in terms of if people can't make it, because I do understand it's a significant amount of time, but and then the other is random thing, because some of the ideas that we have talked about, will rely on legislative action. Just want to note that, on Thursdays, it's when the Climate Solution Caucus of the legislature meets, so it could be, we just give them like a little bit of an overview of our initial thinking so that they can start thinking about it as well, without the details clearly fleshed out and without the governor's, support of them being identified, but it could roll into the, just put that out there as like, you could ask the Climate Solution Caucus. These are our initial ideas, FYI, and then meet for who's ever able to do what Paul just described.
there are two proposals on the table. One, to hold a brainstorming all commission meeting to work on the plan for the next 6 months, and there's another to use that time period for subcommittee meetings. I guess let's have a motion on one of those and we'll see if it passes.
I motion that we brainstorm. In January.
What's that?
I motion that we have a brainstorming session in January.
As a whole group?
Yeah, for everyone.
We call it strategic planning session.
Sure.
We've done a lot of brainstorming.
Yeah. Next steps.
So nobody feels that's preliminary before we get the input from the governor. We might just be spinning our wheels.
We don't have, I can,
But don't we know there's things that we haven't, we know that there's stuff that we haven't even presented that we have to do more thinking on, right?
try to catch everything we haven't gone.
It's an opportunity to say agriculture, we haven't looked enough at it, tier 3, we haven't looked enough at it, smart growth, we haven't looked enough
And
at it,
way
sort of
more
those
institutions.
other things.
We have a lot more than JT too, so yeah.
Joe?
I would be willing to have a brainstorming session if we did not go down the rabbit hole of these specific level of details that we just talked about. At some point, we owe it to ourselves and this issue to begin to think more systemically about the bigger, one or two more strategic and systemic things that will change the world as we know it, rather than only just tinkering at the margins. We did good work over the last few months, but we have to balance that out with a broader thinking about what big ideas need to come out of this thing. If this problem is as big as it is, then the ideas need to be bigger. Right? And so only tinkering at the margins is not going to be enough. We have to have a process to move beyond the margins. And I would be willing to come to a meeting in January for that. I will not come to a meeting to revisit all these details again. Personally. In my opinion.
Riley?
I gotta support that. No, I actually do support that. I think that, that in my mind, there are some pretty big strategic things. And I don't want to have a brainstorming session. I really want to come in and identify some things that really are big and systemic. And I have things that I would like to kind of bring to the table that I think meet that standard. And I think what we've focused on so far are kind of the short list of quick items, and now there's an opportunity to step back and be, high level and strategic. And I would like us not to focus. I don't really have a problem with detail, but it's really trying to focus on a shorter list of things that we ask subgroups to flesh out a little bit.
I would totally support that idea and prefer it, as long as we come with a sort of a structured meeting program. I don't want us to just sit around and throw out ideas. I think that there are lots of techniques that can help facilitate that. I'm sure Paul has probably a tool bag full of them, that, ways that we can actually make that a productive meeting and don't just sit around and talk about things. Certainly have my own ideas about that, but if it was a structured meeting with the goals of trying to step back and take a bigger systemic look at other problems, fully behind that.
The potential, the option that we could do, and this could feed into an all-day February engagement, is we would use this January period to have a facilitated conversation to think about the number of big things that we want to delve more deeply into, but not at that moment. And then we use February as an opportunity to provide more detail and flesh, to provide more of the background as to our current state on some of those issues, or ways to explore different options that have been proposed in other places. As a sort of a way to use January to feed what February could be. Because I feel the need for February, because I feel the sort of getting everybody up to the same level of conversation on a number of issues. But it should be scoped by what we want to focus on.
I like that approach, and I'd also be willing at this point to support that approach and trust the co-chairs to set agendas and do the rest of the legwork.
I second that, almost a motion.
All those in favor, please. All those opposed?
I was a little late, I'm still.
All right, wait, we're not done. Would anybody from the public like to make a comment on today's proceedings? We'll start at this side of the room.
I'm Jill Wilcox, and I'm from Sharon, Vermont, and I'm part of a 5-town action group that's focusing on solutions to these problems. And we're specifically committed to the carbon pricing issue, and we urge the commission to take that very seriously, and we're willing to put a lot of support behind it. And that being said, I commend all of your bold, visionary attempts. They're all pieces of progress, and so we thank you. We want to thank you all.
I'm Donna Smart, and I reiterate, I'm not from any organization, but just, I have been an observer of the capitalist system and the regulatory system, and I've leaned toward regulations when that's what has to be done, but I know all of us act according to our pocketbook, and carbon pricing is sort of that global thing that could help bring down carbon into the atmosphere, because we do what hits our pocketbooks. And you can offset that because, like the Essex plan, you can say, okay, these people who can't transition as quickly will offset their electricity bills, but it has to be something global that hits everybody's pocketbook, or else they are not going to change their behavior, and transportation is a behavior issue.
Sorry, I forgot your name. You'd be next.
I just wanna, why are we all here, rather than someplace else? If we're to keep global temperatures from rising no more than 2 degrees Celsius by the middle of the century, with a high degree of probability, the remaining carbon budget is 600 billion tons of carbon equivalent greenhouse gas emissions. Current emissions are about 400 billion tons, 40 billion tons a year. In 15 years, we'll reach the cap. If we cut them in half by 15 years from now, we'll probably use up 3/4 of the budget to run 8 or 9 years. So this is a real dire emergency. And I'm often frustrated when people don't realize that. I'm not speaking to people here, people in general public. So that's one part of it. And it's a very difficult problem. There's so many different angles, so many different knowledges, technologies that need to come together. There's no magic solution in terms of a technological miracle. There's no magic solution in terms of some sort of single policies. We have to find step by step on a long and steep path, because the longer we need to dilate, the steeper the path becomes, the narrower the ocean, and the greater the cost. If we don't deal with this, forthright and expeditious manner as possible, and we can talk about economic growth, like the right likes to talk about. We can talk about social justice, like the left likes to talk about. But if we don't deal with this, the damages, the dislocations that global warming and climate disruption cause render economic growth and prosperity however defined, social justice however defined, largely. So I just go back to my favorite proposal. I think this commission is a good idea. I don't know how long it's going to runs. But I've said before, this is a very complex problem. We have to get a lot of different pieces integrated into the overall solution. That'll take a long time, so that this commission should be refounded by an act of the legislature as a permanent commission.
Thank you. Rick?
At the last meeting, I said that electrification is going to really disrupt the revenue streams that we have for transportation and weatherization and energy efficiency. And someone said, well, what do we do about it? And I said, I'll give you an answer when I come back next time. So these are some some of the dimensions of it, and I will just say that it's possible that we could have a fee on kilowatt hours and a fee on vehicle miles traveled, and that would do it. It will tell you what those fees would be. There is a very large growth in the energy efficiency fund that comes out of electrification. And that potentially is an opportunity for funding transitional activities. It could be expanded to cover BTUs, not kilowatt hours. That would make it even larger. There is a timing problem because it grows gradually. So the bonding proposal that Neil Lunderville has brought up is a way that you could bring those revenues forward to do some of the work now. Thank you.
Anybody else along this line?
My name is David Frank. I'm an owner of a wood heating company called Sunwood Biomass. This is our 13th year. We have 260 installations throughout New England, actually from New Brunswick, Canada, south of Albany. I just want to thank you for your work you've done on this. It's excellent. And we look forward to some real changes moving forward. And if, you know, I got in the industry relatively early on when the mid and small size systems were pretty much non-existent here in the United States. So, you know, this means a lot to me because, you know, I've spent a great deal of time. I've passed 2 bills in the State House and put a lot of time and personal time and money in this. So thank you very much.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Bob Farnham. I finally have a moment to speak. I had someone come visit a piece of property that I have for sale in Thetford, and it's a little camp on 2 acres, and if you want to buy it, let me know. But they were interested in it particularly because they were from Arizona, and they were looking for a place in Vermont as cheap insurance when their water runs out, because their friends down the road are at, I think she said, I should find out, but 2,000 feet drilling for water. So one of the things that I haven't heard brought up is the mass migration. The governor brought it up the other day at his press conference where he talked about the huge economic opportunity that this climate change will have on our economy. And we can put wind turbines on the ridge lines without any concern, because the real concern are going to be the thousands and hundreds of thousands of people moving to New England and Vermont specifically because we have water. So all of our infrastructure that you're talking about and the broadband and being able to work from home and everything, I'm fully behind that, as you can imagine, streaming, and only having been able to stream from 2 of the venues that we presented at. That's incredibly embarrassing, actually. It's not just a little embarrassing. So anyway, my concern is the influx of the mass number of people that will be coming to Vermont, and haven't even heard it brought up. So maybe I missed it, but that is definitely a concern.
Thank you, Bob. I think we've been focused largely on the mitigation piece. That is one of the adaptation side of things we're going to have to consider as a state going forward. There was a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
We need a second.
Thank you all.